Chapter 1345. Sigh. In the Divine Frost Great Hall, Yi Qinghai let out a long sigh, and his killing intent finally dissipated. Qi Wuxioshan saved Nie Tian's life many times, indicating that he was indeed very regretful about what happened back then. Old Hai, I promise you that I will definitely rescue my parents. Nie Tian looked at Yi Qinghai and said solemnly, his eyes sharp and firm. Young lord, this old servant believes you. Yi Qinghai nodded slightly, but he knew in his heart that wanting to rescue Nie Tian's parents was definitely not an easy thing. Yi Qinghai was already in existence close to the peak, but he did not even know where Nie Tian's parents were. At this time, it was simply impossible for Nie Tian to want to rescue them. Next, Nie Tian checked the injuries of Qi Wuxioshan and the other two, and let the three consume some ordinary spirit pills first to recover their strength. Then, Nie Tian handed 3 divine pills to Qing Ju and instructed, when the 3 of them wake up, let them consume the divine pills. Yes. Qing Ju nodded respectfully and took the divine pills. Currently, Nie Tian had hundreds of divine pills in his hands, all obtained from Zhao Zi's interspatial ring. This Zhao Zi really had a lot of goods. There were all kinds of divine pills, martial techniques, and divine artifacts in his interspatial ring. Nie Tian estimated that after Qi Wuxioshan, Han Fei, and Zhang Jianqing consumed the divine pills, their strength could reach the peak of Heavenly Emperor. According to Zhao Zi, these divine pills were all third-rank divine pills. It seemed that there were even higher-rank divine pills. Divine pills of that level must have even stronger medicinal effect. Divine pills were of a higher rank than spirit pills. Nie Tian did not even know how divine pills were refined. It must have been refined with the power of bright spirit, Nie Tian guessed. Immediately, Nie Tian handed Qi Wuxioshan and the others to Qing Ju, and then left with Yi Qinghai. He still had many things to ask the latter. After a while, Nie Tian and Yi Qinghai came to a small courtyard. Old Hai, tell me about my parents. Nie Tian smiled faintly, but his voice was slightly trembling. Young master. Yi Qinghai bowed slightly. He already knew that Nie Tian would ask this question, but his expression was a little complicated. In the end, he said, your mother is Qi Wu Yunxiu, the saintess of the 9 underworlds. Your father is called Nie Fenghua. Yi Qinghai told the story of how Nie Tian's parents met and fell in love with each other, but deliberately avoided mentioning Nie Fenghua's identity. Old Hai, I want to know who my father is. Nie Tian frowned and asked. Nie Tian already knew a little about his mother, Qi Wu Yunxiu. However, he did not know the identity of his father, Nie Fenghua. Judging from Yi Qinghai's identity, Nie Fenghua's status should be extremely high. Your father is... Yi Qinghai looked into the distance. After hesitating for a while, he finally said, he's the Young Alliance Master of the Wind and Cloud Alliance. Wind and Cloud Alliance. Hearing these 3 words, Nie Tian suddenly thought of the Wind and Cloud Medallion that the wayward demonic two took out. His expression became even more complicated. When Zhao Zi saw the Wind and Cloud Medallion, she was extremely terrified. From this, it could be seen that the Wind and Cloud Alliance was definitely a more terrifying force than the Red Moon Divine Palace. Young master, you are still too weak now. There are some things that I cannot tell you. You only need to know that the Wind and Cloud Alliance is a superforce, and the Wind and Cloud Nie family is one of the 9 great clans of creation. Yi Qinghai nodded. He could not explain to Nie Tian how powerful the Wind and Cloud Alliance was, so he could only tell Nie Tian this. The Wind and Cloud Nie family. Nie Tian murmured. His eyes were unusually sharp. He would personally enter the realms in the future to find out what kind of force the Wind and Cloud Alliance was. He felt a little strange. Since the Wind and Cloud Alliance was so powerful, and his father was the Young Alliance Master, who dared to imprison his father? Phew! Nie Tian let out a long breath and said in his heart, it's too early to think about this. Let's settle the matter at hand first. Nie Tian knew that Yi Qinghai would not tell him anything about his parents if he asked again. So he stopped asking and said, Elder Hai, tell me about the godly realm. Godly realm. This was the realm that all heaven realm martial artists dreamed of. Until now, Nie Tian's understanding of the godly realm was still very shallow. Yi Qinghai nodded slightly and said, Actually, there is not much difference between the godly realm and the realms below the heavenly emperor realm. The biggest difference is the divine spark. Once a martial artist condenses the divine spark, he is considered to have officially stepped into the godly realm. The godly realm is divided into 5 realms: low god, middle god, high god, main god, and supreme god. Each realm is further divided into 4 small realms: early stage, middle stage, late stage, and peak stage. For example, that Zhao Zi you met is an early stage mid-god, while the other person is an early stage low god. Early middle god and early low god. Nie Tian murmured and said, No wonder I could defeat the first person but couldn't even withstand Zhao Zi's aura. So there is a big difference between the two. Yi Qinghai nodded and said, A low god has just condensed the divine spark, but a middle god's divine spark is already very stable. The difference between the two is like heaven and earth. Elder Hai, if Zhao Zi is an outer elder of the Crimson Moon Divine Palace, then the inner elders of the Crimson Moon Divine Palace are all high gods? Nie Tian suddenly thought of something and couldn't help but laugh. That's right. Yi Qinghai nodded again and said, The Crimson Moon Divine Palace is one of the 12 divine palaces of the God realm. Its inner elders are roughly high gods, and its palace master, Qi Yefeng, has the strength of a main god. Main god. Nie Tian's eyes flickered and seemed to be a little excited. He guessed that main gods should be the peak strength of the god realm. At that moment, Nie Tian suddenly looked at Yi Qinghai and said with a smile, Elder Hai, what realm is your strength now? Yi Qinghai seemed to not even care about the Crimson Moon Palace master. His strength was at least at the peak of main god, or maybe even higher. Let's not talk about this old servant's strength. I'm just a little stronger than those palace masters. Yi Qinghai chuckled. Then, his expression turned solemn as he said, However, master's strength is at the top of the realms. Among all the peak experts in the realms, only those old monsters who have lived for hundreds of thousands of years can surpass him. My father is that powerful? Nie Tian's eyes slightly trembled and he suddenly asked, Elder Hai, how old is my father now? Master is about 60,000 years old. Yi Qinghai smiled faintly. 60,000 years old. Nie Tian was stunned and petrified on the spot. Qiwuxiaoshan was only 500 or 600 years old, which meant that Qiwu Yunxiu was around the same age. So, the age difference between Nie Fenghua and Qiwu Yunxiu was a little big. Yi Qinghai seemed to know what Nie Tian was thinking. He smiled faintly and said, 60,000 years old is still very young for a godly realm martial artist. At most, you can be considered as a youth. Chapter 1346. In the small courtyard, Yi Qinghai couldn't help but laugh when he saw Nie Tian's shocked expression. He said, The cultivators of the plain world all think that God realm cultivators are immortal existences. In fact, this view is not correct. What do you mean? Nie Tian was slightly taken aback. He had always thought that after advancing to the deity realm, he would be able to live as long as heaven and earth. Yi Qinghai sighed softly and said, The lifespan of a divine realm martial artist is not eternal, there is a limit. Generally speaking, every time a deity realm cultivator advanced to a major realm, it would be able to increase one's lifespan by 100,000 years. Even those old monsters at the pinnacle of the highest level can live up to 400,000 to 500,000 years. If they can't find a way to break through, their lifespan will also reach its limit. So that's how it is. Nie Tian frowned and looked shocked. However, to a martial artist of the heaven realm or divine realm, being able to live for 100,000 years or even hundreds of thousands of years wasn't much different from an eternity. One had to know, peak heavenly emperor martial artists also only had 1,000 years of lifespan at most. From peak heavenly emperor to initial stage low god realm, this jump could let martial artists increase their lifespan by 100,000 years. This was a qualitative leap. A martial artist at the peak of the immortal state had a lifespan of 50 years. In this case, Nie Tian's father was only over 60,000 years old, which was quite young. From Yi Qinghai's words, one could tell that even if Nie Fenghua's strength wasn't at the pinnacle, it wasn't far from it. Young master, this old servant can't stay in the heavenly realm for too long. Soon, I will have to return to the god domain. You must be extra careful when you enter the god domain. At this time, Yi Qinghai suddenly frowned and said with a solemn expression, Old Hai, is there anything you need to do? Nie Tian asked curiously. Yes. Yi Qinghai nodded solemnly. More than 200 years ago, this old servant received news that master was imprisoned in the realm of darkness, so this old servant left at that time. It's just that in these past 200 years, this old servant has searched the entire realm of darkness, but I haven't found any traces of master. This old servant intends to return to the realm of darkness and continue searching for master's whereabouts. As long as this old servant receives any clues, I will definitely inform young lord. Domain of darkness. Hearing these words, Nie Tian couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. This was the third realm he had heard of, and it sounded extremely dangerous. However, Yi Qinghai was very strong, so Nie Tian didn't need to worry about him. Nie Tian was curious about the story between his father and Yi Qinghai for the latter to be so loyal. Old Hai, when are you planning to leave? Nie Tian asked. Tomorrow. Yi Qinghai nodded and said, The realm has a rule that those who aren't adjudicators can't descend into this plane world. If I stay here for too long, I'll definitely attract attention. I'm afraid that other godhood experts will descend, and that won't be good. Yes. Nie Tian nodded his head. No wonder there were so few god-state rankers in the heaven realm. It was because of this rule. Young lord, when this old servant leaves this time, I plan to bring your sworn brother along with me. Is there any problem? Yi Qinghai suddenly asked. Of course. Nie Tian happily agreed. To be able to stay by Yi Qinghai's side was definitely a great opportunity for Long Outyin. Yi Qinghai nodded his head with a smile and said, This old servant will go find him now. After that, Yi Qinghai didn't stay any longer and disappeared. Nie Tian stood on the spot. He was extremely shocked and couldn't calm down for a long time. He felt that a door had opened in front of him, and a whole new world was waiting for him. Nie Tian. At this time, an anxious voice sounded, and a beautiful figure appeared. It was Mo Rushi. Obviously, Mo Rushi had been waiting for Nie Tian for a long time. Rushi, I'm sorry for making you worry. Nie Tian saw Mo Rushi and smiled with relief. The haze in his heart was swept away, and he took a step forward and pulled the ladder into his arms. It's good that you're fine. Mo Rushi raised her small face, and her gem-like eyes flickered with tenderness. At this moment, Nie Tian's whole body melted in this gentleness. The next morning, when the mottled sunlight fell on the room, Nie Tian got off the bed. He gently kissed Mo Rushi's forehead, and the latter opened her sleepy eyes, looking as shy as a flower. Yi Qinghai was going to leave today. Thinking of this, Nie Tian felt a little disappointed. A moment later, Nie Tian and Mo Rushi's figures appeared on the square outside the Divine Cold Palace. At this time, Mo Qianjun and the others were cultivating hard and didn't appear. Young master. Yi Qinghai was already waiting on the square, and when he saw Nie Tian walking over, he bowed and shouted, This is... Yi Qinghai saw a girl beside Nie Tian, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble. He was a little shocked and asked in surprise, She is my wife, Mo Rushi. Nie Tian smiled faintly and introduced, Rushi, this is Elder Hai. He is a God-state martial artist. God-state martial artist? Mo Rushi's small face was full of surprise and shock. Wife? Yi Qinghai was stunned. He didn't expect that Nie Tian was already married. But his eyes were fixed on Mo Rushi, as if he was sensing something, and finally couldn't help but say, Young master, is this girl the legendary sage? Yes. Before Yi Qinghai finished, Nie Tian nodded solemnly. Oh my God! It really is the sage body. Yi Qinghai's expression changed, and he exclaimed in his heart. He never thought that he would meet the legendary number 1 martial body of all times here. The sage body was far more terrifying than Long Outyen's 9 Seals true dragon body. Even Nie Tian's celestial demon nascent embryo wouldn't dare to say that it was stronger than the sage body. Master is the god-forbidden embryo, and found a female master of the extreme demon embryo, who gave birth to a celestial demon embryo. If young master and this girl had a child, how terrifying the child's talent would be. Yi Qinghai suddenly thought of this, and he murmured in his heart, his whole body directly petrified. If Nie Tian and Mo Rushi had a child, the child's talent would be unimaginable. Seeing Yi Qinghai's reaction, Nie Tian thought that the latter was shocked by Mo Rushi's strength, and he couldn't help but laugh and said, Rushi's sage body has just awakened, and her great potential has not been revealed yet. Yi Qinghai nodded slightly, and finally calmed down, and said goodbye to Nie Tian and Mo Rushi, and did not stay any longer. This time, Yi Qinghai not only brought Long Outyen with him, but also Lu Mo Tu and Kong Shibua. Nie Tian was very curious about Kong Shibua's identity, and why Lu Mo Tu respectfully called him young master, and Yi Qinghai also doted on him. But Yi Qinghai didn't say, so Nie Tian didn't ask too much. Yi Qinghai and the others didn't stay any longer, and their figures soared into the sky, directly breaking through the void. Looking at the void crack high in the sky, Nie Tian's expression was somewhat complicated. After today's departure, he didn't know when they would meet again. Chapter 1347. In the blink of an eye, several months passed. In the divine cold palace, in a secluded courtyard. Finally succeeded. In the room, a joyous voice sounded out, clearly very excited. Following that, the door to the room opened, and a figure walked out, actually somewhat unfamiliar. For some reason, this figure flickered with a strange light, appearing somewhat illusory, as though it was not a physical body. Looking closely, this face was actually very familiar. It was Nie Tian's soul slave, Nie Chio. Corpse Luo, you finally have a normal physical body. At this time, another figure walked out. It was Nie Tian. Nie Tian looked at Nie Chio in front of him, appearing very satisfied. The current Nie Chio, although his body and appearance did not change, but he had a brand new soul, Corpse Luo Demon Lord. Corpse Luo Demon Lord. He abandoned the spirit-devouring rat body, and took over Nie Chio's body. Previously, Nie Chio was just a remnant soul body, emotionless, just right to be Corpse Luo Demon Lord's physical body material. Nie Tian found a body remodeling divine pill in Zhao Zi's interspatial ring, allowing Nie Chio's body to gradually condense into a physical body. Nie Chio, since this lord has used your body, then this lord will continue to use your name. In the future, there will be no Corpse Luo Demon Lord, only Nie Chio. Corpse Luo Demon Lord felt his new body, and was very satisfied. As he spoke, his palm flipped, and a surging vortex actually appeared in his hand. Godhead. What appeared in Nie Chio's hand was a godhead. Nie Chio's original body was Juying Divine Palace's elder Ju Qianqiu. Back then when Ju Qianqiu's soul clone descended, he had the strength of a 9th-level heavenly emperor, but his original body's strength was deity realm. Nie Chio's body contained the bright god power. Adding on the divine pill's bright god power, it actually allowed Corpse Luo Demon Lord to condense a godhead. Corpse Luo Demon Lord advanced to deity realm before entering the domain. Nie Chio, This name is much better than corpse Luo Demon Lord. Nye Tian smiled faintly and said, My soul blood contract with you back then should be removed. From now on, you are a free man. With a thought, Nye Tian caused the blood soul contract to appear in front of him, trembled violently and then was destroyed. Corpse Demon Lord had been by Nye Tian's side for a long time and had helped him a lot. Moreover, his personality had gradually changed. At least, he was no longer a cruel and bloodthirsty person. The soul blood contract was no longer needed. Thank you, Master. Nye Chio laughed and said, Master, I have nowhere to go now, and wish to continue staying by Master's side. I seek Master's permission. Nye Tian's face darkened. He never thought that Nye Chio would actually make such a request. He laughed and said, Nye Chio, you can continue to follow me, but we will no longer be master and servant, we will be friends. Thank you, Master. Ah no, thank you, Master. Nye Chio chuckled, and his somewhat illusory body trembled slightly. It had to be said that Nye Tian treated Nye Chio well. Not only did he reconstruct his body, he even gave him the silver wolf's hand and purple demon eyes. The current Nye Chio was not only a God Realm martial artist, he even had the silver wolf's hand and purple demon eyes. Maybe it was because he had reconstructed his body, but the silver wolf's hand and purple demon eyes had fused almost perfectly. Nye Tian could feel that Nye Chio's current strength was definitely stronger than a Judicator Li Bo. The silver wolf's hand and purple demon eyes had a unique characteristic. They would become stronger along with the martial artist. Nye Tian was curious, how strong were these two things on Nye Chio's body? Master, I have a small request. Just then, Nye Chio suddenly laughed slyly and said, What request? Nye Tian was startled for a moment, then laughed. Master, please leave a spirit imprint on my body, that way, I can enter and exit the 3 Lives Stone at any time. Nye Chio laughed and said, I can feel that the reason why I can directly condense my God Lattice is because I absorbed a lot of Starry Sky Saint Flames in the Hellfire Furnace. The Starry Sky Saint Flame can make me stronger. Starry Sky Saint Flame. Nye Tian frowned. He then recalled that Corpse Demon Lord had used the Starry Sky Saint Flame to refine Nye Chio as a soul slave. Could it be that the Starry Sky Saint Flame contains bright spirit power? Nye Tian felt that it was strange. He muttered, of course he would not reject Nye Chio. He shot out his divine sense and left a spirit imprint on the latter's body. Generally speaking, martial artists could not leave a spirit imprint on other people, because martial artists themselves had their own spirit imprint. But Nye Chio had a blood pact with Nye Tian in the past, so it was different. Master, I will go take a look inside the 3 Lives Stone. It seems like Lady Cher is about to awaken. Nye Chio said, then disappeared. With Nye Tian's spirit imprint, Nye Chio could directly enter the former's soul space. Nye Tian nodded his head, calculating the time. Cher should be awakening soon. Cher's body contained the 3 lives meridians, and she had absorbed over 10,000 Sword Dao inheritances. Who knows what kind of strength she would have after her awakening. Nye Tian estimated that Cher might directly reach the strength of a lower god, or even stronger. One must know that the 10,000 Sword Dao inheritances were left behind by ancient God Realm powerhouses. One could imagine how powerful they were. Rushi's closed-door training is about to end. I reckon that after she comes out, her strength will reach the peak of Heavenly Emperor. Nye Tian suddenly thought of Mo Rushi and muttered. Mo Rushi had consumed the divine pill, in addition to her saint physique. Removing the saint imprint, the saint energy in her body would be completely released. She would definitely reach the peak of Heavenly Emperor. Nye Tian had been trying to break through to the God Realm recently, trying to condense his godhead, but the Heaven Realm's deity domain's God-E energy was pitifully scarce, so he failed multiple times. In fact, Nye Tian had many kinds of God-E energy in his body, but it was not easy to fuse them together. I have to go to the Realmverse as soon as possible. Nye Tian thought of the heart of nothingness in his body, and his face turned solemn. He still had to find the boundary of the first demonic fire universe, otherwise the power of the stars would not be able to suppress the heart of nothingness. Let's go see De Bayo, Rower, and the others. Nye Tian thought of Jean De Bayo and the others, and the corners of his mouth curled up, and he was about to leave the courtyard. A few months ago, he had asked Han Ling and the others to bring Jean De Bayo, Nye Yuro, Li Yi, Tang Hao, and many people related to him to the heaven realm. During this period, apart from cultivating, Nye Tian spent time with his old friends, and it could be said that he had a very leisurely life. Kaboom! However, just as Nye Tian walked out of the courtyard, there was an explosion in the sky. He squinted his eyes and looked at the sky, only to see a crack in the sky, and several figures walked out of the crack. God Realm experts. Nye Tian frowned and his eyes trembled. He activated the holographic divine patterns and locked onto the figures in the sky. It's Zhao Zi and the others. In the next moment, Nye Tian saw a familiar face, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and he murmured, "They should be here to make arrangements for the new 9 emperors in the heaven realm." Among the 9 emperors, several had died, and the heaven realm was shaken. It was time to make arrangements for the new 9 emperors. However, at this moment, Nye Tian's eyes changed slightly, and he saw a figure behind Zhao Zi, and it looked somewhat familiar. 1,000 killing streams. Nye Tian squinted his eyes and stared at the person behind Zhao Zi, and he shouted a name. Chapter 1348. 1,000 flowing kill. Nye Tian looked up at the unexpected face in the sky. His eyes slightly narrowed as he thought to himself, why is he here? Could he be the new adjudicator? Nye Tian remembered that Yi Qinghai had told him that there was a rule in this realm that forbade God realm cultivators from appearing in other planes, unless they were adjudicators. Let's go to the Divine Cold Palace first. Nye Tian frowned and decided to go there first. Moments later, Nye Tian appeared on the square outside the Divine Cold Palace. At this time, Frost Tharch, Qingju, and the others also appeared. Master! Han Fei and Zhang Jianqing had also fully recovered and had reached the peak of Heavenly Emperor strength. The two shouted in unison when they saw Nye Tian. Nye Tian nodded slightly and looked up at the sky. Up in the sky, dark clouds rumbled as Zhao Zi and the others descended from the sky, bringing with them a tremendous might that was extremely terrifying. Lord Zhao. Nye Tian took a step forward and greeted Zhao Zi. Mr. Nye Tian. Zhao Zi already knew Nye Tian's name. He forced a smile, but his face did not look too good. Behind him stood 2 figures. One was 1,000 flowing kill, and the other was a red-haired man. His body was as red as fire and looked extremely demonic. 1,000 flowing kill. Frost Tharch and the others also recognized 1,000 flowing kill and couldn't help but exclaim. They did not expect him to appear here. At this moment, 1,000 flowing kill's aura was concealed, but the killing intent in his eyes was not concealed. He stared coldly at Nye Tian. Obviously, he already knew everything. Once Zhao Zi returned to the Red Lunar Divine Palace, he would definitely report everything to his superiors. Then, 1,000 flowing kill would know what happened in the heaven domain. Nye Tian's consciousness swept across 1,000 flowing kill and found that the latter's aura was not any weaker than the previous adjudicator. It seems that 1,000 flowing kill has condensed his godhead and ascended to the god realm. Nye Tian frowned and thought. Han Shua's guess was correct. 1,000 flowing killer's current strength was that of an early-stage low god, and there were faint signs of him advancing to a mid-stage low god. It had only been a little over 100 years since he entered the god domain from the heaven domain. To be able to condense a godhead in such a short period of time, he was already a genius. Long time no see, 1,000 flowing killer. Nye Tian raised his head slightly, not avoiding 1,000 flowing kill's gaze at all. He smiled faintly, his smile extremely playful. Nye Tian. Qian Lu stared fixedly at Nie Tian with an extremely murderous gaze. He shouted out the latter's name word by word, showing how much he hated the latter. Although Nie Tian's appearance had changed, his old aura was still there. Thousand Flowing Kill could naturally recognize him at a glance. So you two know each other. Zhao Zi smiled awkwardly and said, Qianlu Sha is the new adjudicator of the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. This time, he came to the Heaven World's divine realm to appoint the new 9 monarch. As expected, Nie Tian's heart trembled slightly. The adjudicators were really here to appoint the new 9 emperors. However, Thousand Flowing Kill's motive was obviously not pure. He was here for Nie Tian. How could Thousand Flowing Kill let go of Nie Tian with the hatred of killing his father and master? However, Thousand Flowing Kill was currently suppressing his anger. It was obvious that he couldn't casually make a move on Nie Tian. Zhao Zi knew of Nie Tian's identity and secretly signaled Thousand Flowing Kill to not be agitated. After Zhao Zi returned to the Crimson Moon Divine Palace, he had already informed everything to the Crimson Moon Empress. The latter was very happy that Nie Tian was able to join the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. She even shouted that the time for the Crimson Moon Divine Palace to rise had arrived. Qi Yifeng told Zhao Zi not to reveal a word about Nie Tian to anyone. After Nie Tian joined the Crimson Moon Divine Palace, everything would be handled like an ordinary disciple. There wouldn't be any preferential treatment. Zhao Zi knew that Qi Yifeng did this to avoid arousing suspicion. Cough, cough. At this moment, Zhao Zi coughed twice and said, This time, the new 9 emperors will be appointed. This elder will be the main arbiter. Vincent and Thousand Flowing Kill will be the assistant arbiters. Vincent, this was the name of the red-haired young man. Nie Tian could faintly sense that Vincent's strength was above Thousand Flowing Kills. He seemed to be a mid-stage low god. At this moment, Vincent was looking around absent-mindedly, as though he didn't care about anything in front of him. Lord Arbiters, please. Mao Xianglong calmed down, bowed slightly, and said respectfully. Although Thousand Flowing Kill used to be a member of the Heaven Realm, his current status was different from before. Mao Xianglong and the others had to be respectful. Zhao Zi and the others arrived at the Divine Cold Hall and took their seat. Zhao Zi sat on the main seat and swept his gaze across everyone. He coughed twice and said, Something happened in the Heaven Realm. Among the 9 emperors, the Snow Emperor, the Illusion Emperor, the Purple Emperor, the Day-Night Emperor, the Pill Emperor, and the East Emperor are dead. Only the Frost Emperor, the Poison Emperor, and the Miao Emperor are left. The Heaven Realm cannot be without a leader. I came here this time to appoint the new 9 emperors. 6 of the 9 emperors died. 5 of them died at the hands of Nie Tian. Only the Illusion Emperor was killed by the Snow Emperor. When Thousand Flowing Kill heard Zhao Zi's words, especially when he heard the 2 words Snow Emperor, the fierceness in his eyes intensified. He actually released his killing intent towards Nie Tian without concealing it. Nie Tian completely ignored Thousand Flowing Kill and laughed. He looked at Zhao Zi and asked, Lord Zhao, I would like to know, what does the 9 emperors represent? Until now, Nie Tian still didn't know what the 9 emperors represented. Therefore, he was very curious. Zhao Zi nodded and said, The 9 emperors represent the Red Lunar Divine Palace in charge of the Heaven Realm. They are the representatives of the Divine Palace in this plane. The Red Lunar Divine Palace will allow the 9 emperors to reach the peak of this plane and provide protection for the 9 emperors. However, the 9 emperors cannot enter the upper domains. Why? Nie Tian was slightly stunned. He couldn't help but be surprised. This. Zhao Zi laughed and said, Every 300 years or so, the Red Lunar Divine Palace will choose the most talented people from the plane to enter the domain. These people are chosen by the 9 emperors, and the 9 emperors cannot choose themselves. Nie Tian frowned and nodded slightly. He immediately understood. If the 9 emperors could enter the domain, they would definitely choose him. How could the others have a chance? Because of this, the Snow Emperor desperately wanted to advance to the godly state and enter the domain with his own strength. However, he didn't know what the essence of the godly state was. No matter how talented he was, without the power of spirit, he couldn't condense the god spark. Everything was in vain. The Frost Emperor, Poison Emperor and Meow Emperor are still the same. The Frost Emperor will be promoted to the new 9 emperors. Zhao Zi looked at Mao Xianglong. His divine sense moved and found that the latter's strength had improved, far surpassing ordinary peak experts. He immediately realized that Nie Tian must have made her consume the divine pills. Those elixirs were all Zhao Zi's possessions. Nie Tian heard Zhao Zi's words and frowned. He said cold, "No. No." Chapter 1349. Nie Tianling said coldly, directly denying Zhao Zi's words. This made the atmosphere in the hall become strange. Zhao Zi's expression was slightly awkward. If it was an ordinary person who spoke to him like this, he would definitely be furious and might even kill them directly. But Nie Tian was different. He knew Nie Tian's identity. There was a super powerful figure behind him and a super powerful family. Moreover, the palace master seemed to see Nie Tian as the life-saving straw to save the Red Moon Divine Palace. Upon returning to the Red Moon Divine Palace, Zhao Zi learned some things from Qi Yefeng. The Red Moon Divine Palace was already on the verge of collapse. If it couldn't get into the top 6 in the next grand competition of the 12 shrines, it would be removed from the 12 shrines. This was because the Red Moon Divine Palace had been at the bottom 5 times in a row. If it couldn't make a comeback this time, it would be a disaster. Although there were a few good seedlings this time, such as Shui Wushuang and Qian Lu Sha, it was tantamount to a fool's dream for the Red Moon Divine Palace to rush into the top 6. Zhao Zi didn't know why Qi Yefeng was so confident in Nie Tian. Perhaps he didn't understand what the divine demon nascent embryo meant. In short, Nie Tian was an extremely important figure to the Red Moon Divine Palace. They couldn't afford to lose him. Therefore, Zhao Zi had to consider his words. "Mr. Nie Tian, do you think there is anything wrong with my appointment?" Zhao Zi calmed down and looked at Nie Tian. Nie Tian nodded and said coldly, "Frost Empress will no longer be one of the 9 emperors. She will enter the territory with me." Becoming one of the 9 emperors meant that one couldn't enter the territory. Therefore, Nie Tian wouldn't let Frost Empress continue to be one of the 9 emperors. This. Zhao Zi frowned and his expression became even more awkward. He didn't expect Nie Tian to be so overbearing. At this moment, Nie Tian had a cold expression on his face as he observed Zhao Zi's reaction. He could tell that Zhao Zi was very accommodating to him, as if he was worried about something. Impudent! At that moment, Thousand Flowing Kill suddenly stood up and glared at Nie Tian, bellowing, "The 9 emperors are appointed by the adjudicators. Who do you think you are, daring to question Lord Zhao's decision?" Thousand Flowing Kills stared at Nie Tian, his killing intent surging. Nie Tian was not afraid in the slightest. Instead, he smiled playfully and said indifferently, "I am questioning Lord Zhao's decision. Lord Zhao hasn't said anything yet, so why are you barking here?" Nie Tian, you. Qian Flowing Kill was displeased. He didn't expect Nie Tian to be so arrogant as to call him a dog. "Thousand Streams of Death, I know you want revenge, but don't make it so obvious." Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, "Perhaps you don't know yet, but I'm also going to enter the domain realm, and I'm going to join the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. If you want revenge, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future." Thousand Flowing Kill's eyes narrowed as he stared at Zhao Zi, asking in shock, "Lord Zhao, is what he said true?" "Yes." Zhao Zi nodded slightly and said, "This seat has already reported this matter to Lord Palace Lord, and he has agreed." "Why?" Thousand Flowing Kill was stunned. He roared in anger as if he had gone mad. Nie Tian was going to join the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. To him, this was definitely bad news. As long as Nye Tian became a member of the Crimson Moon Divine Palace, he couldn't kill him as he pleased. The Crimson Moon Divine Palace had a rule that forbade internal strife, unless Nye Tian was willing to fight to the death with him. Thousand Flowing Kill, calm down. At this moment Vincent, who had been silent all this while, suddenly spoke. He hasn't joined the Crimson Moon Divine Palace yet, right? You still have a chance. For example, you can kill him now. The gloomy voice reverberated in the hall, and it seemed extremely demonic and cold. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and he couldn't help but glance at Vincent. The latter's lips actually curled into a provocative smile. Vincent, don't speak anymore. Zhao Zi was enraged. He didn't expect Vincent to provoke Thousand Flowing Kill to attack Nye Tian. He scolded in a cold manner. Understood. Vincent smiled and said, Lord Zhao, I'll leave the matter of appointing the 9 monarchs to you. I'd better go out and take a look. This is my first time coming to the world of lowly people, so I'm quite curious. With that, Vincent stood up and left the hall. Zhao Zi's expression was gloomy as he thought. Vincent, if your father wasn't an inner elder, how would you dare to speak to this seat like this? It was good that Vincent left. His presence here was troublesome. Although Zhao Zi and the other two were adjudicators, Zhao Zi was the main adjudicator. Therefore, he was the one who truly had the power to appoint the 9 monarchs. Thousand Flowing Kill glanced at Zhao Zi and finally sat down. Mr. Nye Tian, I will consider your words. Zhao Zi let out a long sigh and said, But Frost Empress used to be one of the 9 monarchs. Even if she no longer holds the position of one of the 9 monarchs, she can't enter the territory. Nye Tian frowned. It seemed that things were more troublesome than he had imagined. Lord Ao Jian, I want to continue staying in the Heaven Realm. At this time, Frost Empress suddenly stood up and said calmly, Mr. Nye Tian, if you really want the Frigid Empress to enter the realms, then become an inner sect elder of the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. As long as you reach that position, you can bring anyone into the realms. Zhao Zi looked at Nye Tian and said in a deep voice, Inner elder? Nye Tian laughed. Zhao Zi was simply fooling him. Red Moon Divine Palace's inner elders all had the strength of High God. Nye Tian hadn't even condensed his godhead yet. He was 3 realms away from High God. By the time he became an inner elder, Frost Empress and the others would have already fallen. All right. After thinking for a while, Nye Tian finally sighed and said, Frost Empress, I respect your opinion. Nye Tian knew that Frost Empress didn't want to make things difficult for him. She also wanted to stay in the Heaven Realm to accompany Qingju. Thank you, Mr. Nye Tian. Zhao Zi smiled and bowed to express his gratitude. Mr. Zhao, don't be in a hurry to thank me. At this time, Nye Tian smiled strangely and said, I have no objection if you want Frost Empress to be one of the 9 monarchs. However, the 6 new 9 monarchs must be appointed by me. Nye Tian, how dare you? Just as Nye Tian finished speaking, Thousand Flowing Kill abruptly stood up and bellowed, The matter of appointing the 9 emperors as the adjudicators, and you've crossed the line time and time again. Are you looking down on the adjudicators? Looking down on the adjudicators is looking down on the Divine Palace. Can you bear this crime? Humph. Nye Tian raised his head and looked at Thousand Flowing Kill. He also stood up and said, Thousand Flowing Kill, I am not looking down on the adjudicators. I am looking down on you. As the cold voice fell, it was like a steel needle piercing Thousand Flowing Kill's heart. His whole body suddenly trembled, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Nye Tian, you are courting death. Suddenly, Thousand Flowing Kill shouted angrily. His whole body's aura surged and directly pressed down on Nye Tian. Chapter 1350. Boom! Above the divine cold hall, Thousand Flowing Kill's sudden attack shook the entire hall and made it tremble. Nye Tian's brows sank slightly as he faced the attack of thousands of palm shadows, but his face remained calm. The next moment, Endless black flames of nothingness gushed out of his body and devoured all the palm shadows that were crazily pressing down on him. The black flames of nothingness were Nietion's strongest trump card at the moment. Sakura had warned him not to use the heart of nothingness as it would accelerate the berserk state of the heart of nothingness. But Nietion couldn't do anything about it because he was facing a God Realm expert. Thousand Flowing Kill's face darkened as he watched his all-out attack being devoured by Nietion. He was extremely shocked. He didn't expect that Nietion was so strong that he could contend with him head-on. One should know that Thousand Flowing Kill's current strength was close to that of a mid-stage low god. His all-out attack could instantly kill an early-stage low god expert. Could it be that Nietion's strength was stronger than an early-stage low god? That's right, Nietion's current strength was indeed stronger than an early-stage low god. He could already defeat Li Bo a few months ago. Now that his strength had improved, he could contend with Thousand Flowing Kill head-on. Thousand Flowing Kill didn't expect Nietion's strength to be so strange. His eyes flickered and his killing intent intensified. Thousand Flowing Kill, are you crazy? But at this moment, Zhao Zi suddenly stood up and let out a deep roar that shook the entire hall. Nietion meant a lot to the Crimson Lunar Divine Palace. Zhao Zi naturally couldn't just sit back and watch. Lord Zhao Thousand Flowing Kill was stunned. He couldn't understand why Zhao Zi cared so much about Nietion. Could it be that Nietion and Zhao Zi had some kind of relationship? Sit down, Zhao Zi coldly rebuked. Then, he looked at Nietion and his expression softened. He apologized. Mr. Nietion, are you all right? I'm fine. Nietion faintly smiled and said, Someone is very strong, but if you want to hurt me, you're still a bit lacking. When the merciless mockery entered Thousand Flowing Kill's ears, he almost went crazy. Mr. Nietion, I'm very sorry about what happened just now. I'll leave the remaining 6 martial monarchs to you. Zhao Zi nodded and said. Actually, he didn't care who the 9 thearchs were. If he could do Nietion a favor, why wouldn't he do it? Thank you, Lord Zhao. Nietion smiled faintly, and then said the names of 6 people. Li Yi, Tang Hao, Yi Linyun, Qiu Shan, Chen Jini, Nie Wenyuan. Alright, no problem. Zhao Zi smiled faintly and said, Mr. Nietion, please have these 6 people come to the Divine Cold Palace within 3 days. Nietion smiled. The 6 people he named were all people who had a close relationship with him, and it was also after careful consideration. The reason why Nietion made Li Yi and the others the 9 thearchs was because he wanted them to reach peak Heavenly Emperor strength as soon as possible. Zhao Zi said that after becoming one of the 9 thearchs, the Crimson Moon Divine Palace would let the 9 thearchs reach peak Heavenly Emperor strength. As for how to let them enter the realms in the future, Nietion would think of another way. Nie Wenyuan was a member of Moyong City's Nie clan, an elder of a weak clan in the 3,000 Lesser Worlds. He probably never dreamed that one day he would become one of the 9 thearchs who ruled the Heaven Realm. Currently, these people were already in the Heaven Realm, and Nietion would let them rush to the Divine Cold Palace as soon as possible. Han Fei, Zhang Jianqing, Qing Ju, and the others were already peak Heavenly Emperors, so they didn't need the Crimson Moon Divine Palace to increase their strength. If possible, Nietion would bring them into the God-shocking domain. Cold Tharch, send someone to get the Poison Tharch and the Miao Tharch. The new 9 thearchs still have many things to deal with. Zhao Zi smiled faintly and said to Mao Xianglong. Yes. Mao Xianglong nodded respectfully. Zhao Zi heaved a long sigh of relief after the 9 thearchs' matters were settled. Nietion's expression was also indifferent, and he had a smile on his face. However, Thousand Flowing Kill's expression was getting darker and darker. However, at this moment, Nietion's brows suddenly tightened, and he raised his head to look outside the palace. His figure flickered, and he directly rushed out. What happened? The others were stunned by Nietion's sudden action, and they were puzzled. "Let's go out and take a look." Zhao Zi was the first to react, and his figure flashed as he followed. At this moment, in the sky above the divine cold palace, a figure stood tall, with a strange smile on his face, and he stared playfully at a huge beast below. That huge beast was 1,000 meters long, and its entire body was sparkling and translucent, as though it was covered in a layer of ice crystals. Its black and white body tumbled in the air, and there were huge dark circles around its eyes, giving off a charmingly naive feeling. On the back of this huge beast stood a beautiful girl, and her face was extremely stubborn. The huge beast and the girl were none other than the Pishio, Aguai and Nyeyuro, and the person they were facing was Vincent. At this moment, Nyeyuro was already 15 or 16 years old. Her delicate face had lost its childishness, and in its place was the liveliness and beauty of a young girl. "Who are you?" Nyeyuro's small face was extremely stubborn, and her clear voice rang through the void, and she was very angry. She was originally playing with Aguai, but who knew that Vincent would suddenly appear and hurt Aguai? On Aguai's body there was a huge wound, and it was bleeding profusely. Interesting. In this lowly plane of existence, I can actually meet a divine beast like the Pishio. Vincent did not seem to hear Nyeyuro's words, and he smiled playfully as he stared greedily at the Pishio. It was obvious that he was very interested in the Pishio. This little girl is not bad either. Her strength and talent are very good, and her looks are even better. As Vincent spoke, his eyes were on Nyeyuro, and his eyes were filled with lust. "Scoundrel, this young lady is talking to you," Nyeyuro reproached and actually stomped her foot. The purple wind jade flow sword was drawn, and she directly charged over towards Vincent. The current her was already at the first level of Heavenly Emperor's strength. Of course, this was all thanks to Nyetion's help. The long sword stabbed out. Countless sword shadows appeared in the void, connecting to form a huge sword net, spreading over towards Vincent. "Little girl, your strength is not bad. Unfortunately, meeting this young master, the difference is too great." When Vincent saw Nyeyuro charging over, the corners of his mouth twitched. He reached out with his palm, and the void immediately shook. A huge handprint appeared, pressing down with a loud bang, directly shattering Nyeyuro's sword net, turning into a massive pressure, imprisoning Nyeyuro firmly. "Ah!" Nyeyuro felt the massive force pressing down and could not help but scream, very shrill. "Roar!" When the Pishio, Aguai, saw that Nyeyuro was restrained, it raised its head to the sky and roared angrily. Its massive body galloped up, and heaven and earth immediately trembled. Dark clouds rolled, and a terrifying aura rolled out, roaring as it charged towards Vincent. The Pishio was an ancient divine beast. The current Aguai had already grown up, and its combat strength was even stronger than rank 9 spirit beast. Its fleshy body strength was comparable to deity realm martial artists. Little beast, courting death. When Vincent saw the Pishio rush over, the corners of his mouth curled up into a hint of a smile, cold to the extreme. Chapter 1351. In the void, as Vincent's fist blasted down, the momentum of the world changed instantly. A fist shadow condensed from a huge amount of power came crashing down like a mountain. The huge body of the Pishio rolled in the air, and the surrounding space was filled with a terrifying power of ice. The world seemed to be frozen. Boom! Suddenly, with a loud bang, the huge shadow of the fist landed on the Pishio's body. The terrifying power instantly exploded, and the heaven and earth suddenly trembled. A wave of air rushed out in all directions, rolling and whistling, like a tsunami and a landslide. Roar! In the next moment, a horrifying roar resounded. The enormous body of the Pishio, Aguai, suddenly froze, and a bloody hole that was dozens of meters wide actually appeared on its back. Blood gushed out like a fountain, dyeing the heavens and the earth red, and it was dripping with blood. Vincent's figure stood in the sky, not moving at all. He just frowned and murmured, "What a beast!" It took a punch from me head-on, but it didn't die. As expected of an ancient divine beast. He knew that the Pai Xiao in front of him was far from adulthood. If it fully matured, its strength would be comparable to a superior god or even a lord god. Ah Guai. Nieyuro saw that Ah Guai was seriously injured, and she couldn't help but cry out. Her little face was full of fear. And as her voice fell, a terrible power was released from her body. Endless seven-colored halos were released like ripples, surging in the space. Huh! Vincent was caught off guard, and his divine sense trembled, and he was slightly dazed. It was at this moment that Nieyuro broke free from his control. Her figure moved, and she flew toward Ah Guai. Ah Guai! Nieyuro's figure landed on Ah Guai's body, and she cried out when she saw the terrible wound. Her eyes suddenly became wet. The power of the illusory seal? Vincent frowned slightly, and then immediately came to his senses. A trace of surprise flashed in his eyes, and he seemed very excited. He didn't expect that Nieyuro's body still had the terrifying power of the illusory seal. What Nieyuro released just now was the power of the 1,000-gem illusory seal. Unfortunately, her strength was too weak, and she couldn't fully exert the power of the 1,000-gem illusory seal. This girl is a little interesting. I want her. The corner of Vincent's mouth twitched. His figure moved, and he waved his hand, grabbing toward Nieyuro again. Bastard, you're courting death. At this moment, a thunderous roar suddenly rang out as a silhouette madly rushed over. Amidst the endless black flames, a terrifying sword shadow surged forth. Boom! When the sword shadow landed, it actually shattered the huge palm print in the air. The divine power contained in the palm print spread out and was actually swallowed by the black flames of nothingness. Seeing this scene, Vincent's eyes narrowed. He looked at the newcomer and laughed. The power of the heart of nothingness, interesting. The newcomer was none other than Nye Tian. Ro-er, are you alright? Nye Tian's figure flashed, appearing beside Nieyuro as he asked anxiously. Nieyuro shook her head slightly, then pointed at Ah Guai and said, Big brother Nye Tian, Ah Guai. When Nye Tian saw the wound on Ah Guai's body, he couldn't help but shiver. Immediately after, a terrifying sword chi gushed out of his body and forcefully sealed the wound for Ah Guai. Don't worry, Ah Guai is an ancient beast. This kind of injury is nothing to him, Nye Tian said in a low voice. Immediately after, he looked at Vincent with killing intent. At the same time, Zhao Zi and the others arrived as well. When they saw the scene in the air, they immediately understood. Zhao Zi didn't know much about Vincent, but he had heard that Vincent's character was improper and that he was evil. When Zhao Zi saw the Pai Xiao in the air, he was stunned for a moment. However, he quickly calmed down and asked in a low voice, Frigid Emperor, who is that young lady? She is the sister of Lord Nye Tian. Mao Xianglong nodded his head. His expression was extremely ugly. Little sister. Zhao Zi's heart sank as he cursed inwardly. After the last time he met Nye Tian, he already knew what kind of person Nye Tian was. He was definitely not a kind person who would be bullied by others. It would be fine if you don't provoke him, but once you do, he will definitely not let you go. This is bad. Zhao Zi frowned and his expression was extremely ugly. Nye Tian's identity was not ordinary, and Vincent also had some background. His father was one of the 7 inner elders of the Red Moon Divine Palace. That was why he could be so arrogant. At this moment, even more people arrived. Looking at the figure in the sky, all of them had a look of anger on their faces. Qiu Shan, Jean Debeo, Qiu Ling and the others all arrived. They leaped into the air and came to Nye Tian's side. They all came to the Divine Cold Palace a few months ago and had been in the Divine Cold Palace ever since. Ro-er, are you alright? Among the few figures, one of them appeared in a flash and seemed to be very nervous. And I jamming, I'm fine. Nieyuro glanced at the person and forced a smile. When Nye Tian asked Han Ling to pick them up, Enizichen and Enijamming were also there, so they came to the divine cold palace with them. Yo. At this time Vincent suddenly laughed and said, I can't tell that this little girl has such a high status to be able to make so many people care about her. Nye Tian took a step forward, his eyes flashing with coldness. Mr. Nye Tian, this little girl is your sister, right? Vincent felt Nye Tian's killing intent, but he was not afraid at all. When he heard how Nye Yuro addressed Nye Tian, he laughed and said with a sinister expression, I have a small request. Mr. Nye Tian, please betroth your sister to me. How about it? Vincent knew of Nye Tian's strength, but he did not put the latter in his eyes at all. Moreover, he felt that he was interested in Nye Yuro. This was a great thing for Nye Tian, and the latter would definitely agree without hesitation. He was a God Realm martial artist from an upper-class domain, while Nye Tian and the others were low-class people from the plain world. They were not on the same level at all. This kind of betrothal, Nye Tian had no reason to reject. Vincent's voice was not loud, but every word that fell into Nye Tian's ears was akin to a poisonous needle, driving him mad with the urge to kill. Vincent, you're courting death. Nye Tian stood there, his eyes bloodshot, the blood in his body flowing in reverse. His aura erupted and with a roar, he took a step forward and slashed out with his sword. At this moment, he no longer cared about Vincent's identity as an adjudicator. This person must die. Vincent was taken aback. He hadn't expected that Nye Tian would actually dare to attack him. Immediately afterwards, he let out a cold laugh and said, An ant from a different plane dares to attack me? Vincent's face darkened, the corner of his mouth twitched. With a flick of his palm, a whirlpool of spirit force appeared. It was his godhead. Almost at the same time, a horrifying howl sounded, like a dragon's roar, reverberating in the sky. Everyone was stunned, looking at the source of the howl. It was Enijamming. Chapter 1352. What's going on? Zhao Zi looked at Enijamming and felt an enormous and boundless energy from the latter's body. His gaze trembled violently and he revealed extreme fear. At this moment, Nye Tian's figure had already rushed out and did not notice Enijamming. Nye Tian swung his sword. His blood chi and sword intent spread out in the air. The void black flame released a terrifying aura, like a dark cloud, rolling and roaring. The enormous momentum seemed to be able to devour heaven and earth. Vincent stood in midair with the corners of his mouth curling into a cold smile. He did not take Nye Tian seriously at all. Die! The next moment, Vincent flipped his palm and directly slapped out. That whirlpool instantly expanded and the domain of God shrouded the space. Nye Tian's figure paused slightly in the air and his attack slowed down a little. Brat, if you dare to attack again, the outcome is only one word, death. Vincent smiled coldly and a chilly intent flashed across his eyes. His domain of God had already been opened. If Nye Tian still dared to charge forward, he would be courting death. In the domain of God, Nye Tian's speed and attack were suppressed. But his figure still did not stop and he still charged forward madly. Boom! The blood-colored sword shadow whizzed out and pressed down on Vincent. Even the domain of God shook a little. Brat, I admit that your strength far exceeds a peak heavenly emperor expert. Even an early-stage low-god expert might not be your match. But it's a pity that the person you've met is me. The corners of Vincent's mouth curled into a trace of coldness. As his big hand slapped down, a dark green divine power appeared and bloomed in the air, forming a giant wooden palm print. Rumble! Under the giant wooden palm print, Nye Tian's sword shadow collapsed with a loud bang and dissipated. His strength was still a little weak, and could not contend with Vincent head-on. Vincent had the strength of a mid-stage low-god. His combat strength was far more powerful than the 1,000-flow kill. With one palm, he vowed to exterminate Nye Tian. But at this moment, Nye Tian had a fearless look. Instead, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly and revealed a strange smile. He muttered, "Niechio, this is the time." Yes. Following that, a voice was heard as a crimson figure appeared out of thin air. It turned into a ball of blazing flames and surged forward. Bang! With a muffled sound, the blazing flames pierced through the giant wooden handprint in the air and shot towards Wilson. This sudden change caused Vincent's gaze to shake, and he couldn't help but tremble. He wanted to make another move, but it was already too late. In the next moment, the blazing flames blasted over, and Wilson's figure was directly sent flying, letting out a shrill scream. When the people on the ground saw the scene in the sky, their eyes couldn't help but tremble. They were astonished, shocked, and in disbelief. Vincent was actually sent flying by Nietian? How was this possible? Zhao Zi and the others were dumbstruck. They could not believe what they were seeing. At the side, Thousand Flowing Kill's face was even paler. He hadn't expected that even Vincent would lose to Nietian. But in the next moment, Zhao Zi and the others understood that Nietian actually had a helper. Inside the ball of flames, a faint silhouette appeared. God Realm Martial Artist. Zhao Zi could sense that Niechio was actually a God Realm martial artist, and he couldn't help but exclaim. In the Heaven Realm, a God Realm martial artist actually appeared. This was too strange. At this moment, Nietian stabilized his body. His eyes were filled with killing intent. He wanted to destroy Wilson's physical body. He already knew that the previous slash wouldn't be able to hurt Wilson. Hence, Niechio was the real killer move. After gaining the upper hand in one move, Nietian naturally wanted to grab hold of the opportunity and thoroughly defeat Wilson. Big Brother Nietian. Just at this moment, Nieyiro's voice rang out, sounding extremely panicked. Huh! Nietian was slightly startled. Immediately after, he sensed something and exclaimed, "Oh no!" In an instant, Nietian suddenly felt a terrifying dragon chi, causing his entire body to tremble and his expression to change. He suddenly turned around and saw Enai Jiaming's ferocious face. Instantly, his face darkened and he shouted, "Everyone leave!" Enai Jiaming stood in midair, a terrifying dragon chi surged around his body, and his eyes became demonic. In his mind, countless images flashed by. Endless memories surged crazily, causing him to go crazy. Ah-dash! All of a sudden, Enai Jiaming howled towards the sky. The terrifying sound turned into billowing airwaves and spread throughout the space. Oh no! Witnessing this scene, Nietian's heart sank. Enai Jiaming was about to awaken the memories of his past life. However, Nietian remembered that the Dragon Rebel clan once said that Enai Jiaming would only awaken the memories of his past life when he was 16 years old. There was still more than half a year before he turned 16 years old. Why would his memories suddenly awaken? Did something happen to him? Nietian frowned and gestured for everyone to leave. He had missed the opportunity to calm Enai Jiaming down. At the moment, he could no longer prevent Enai Jiaming's memories from awakening. Enai Jiaming must have been provoked by Vincent's words just now. Nietian reacted immediately. He frowned and his face was frighteningly gloomy. In fact, he had long known that Enai Jiaming had feelings for Nieyiro, but he had never pointed it out. Vincent's words had enraged Enai Jiaming and triggered the awakening of the memories of his past life. Enai Jiaming had experienced a brief awakening of his memories before. At that time, he had to rely on Nietian to stabilize his memories. Moreover, Nietian knew that once Enai Jiaming's memories were awakened, the vanishing shadow inhibition in his body would break out completely. That would be the day of his death. Ah! At this moment, Enai Jiaming let out another angry roar. His entire body was like a wild beast, surging with a terrifying aura. The extremely violent Enai Jiaming's inverse dragon aura spread in the air and spread thousands of meters away. Enai Jiaming's aura skyrocketed crazily. His strength rose steadily and reached the peak of Heaven Emperor in an instant. Previously, his strength had always been at the Heaven Realm. In order to suppress the vanishing shadow inhibition, his strength did not dare to increase. How is this possible? Zhao Zi sensed the aura on Enai Jiaming's body and was extremely shocked. He clearly felt that the power in Enai Jiaming's body was extremely huge. It was something he had never seen in his life. It seemed that even an expert like the Crimson Moon Palace Master could not compare to it. Who is this person? How can there be such a terrifying power hidden in his body? Zhao Zi was shocked and his body was trembling. Brat, die for this young master. All of a sudden, a vicious voice echoed out from behind Nie Tian. Vincent dashed towards Nie Tian, his enormous aura surging in the air. He had just been injured by Nie Tian and Nie Qiu. Now that he had recovered, he wanted to kill Nie Tian at all costs. Nie Tian and Nie Qiu had been paying attention to Enai Jiaming. They did not expect Vincent to attack at this time. When they reacted and wanted to make a move, it was already too late. Scram! At the critical moment, Enai Jiaming's voice was suddenly heard. The opposing dragon energy around him actually condensed into a dark demonic dragon. Its huge body was boundlessly huge. It suddenly rolled and charged towards Wilson. Chapter 1353. In the void, a dark demonic dragon condensed around Enai Jiaming's body. The massive body of the demonic dragon rolled and actually blasted Wilson away. How is this possible? On the ground, Zhao Zi and the others trembled violently when they saw this scene. Disbelief was written all over their faces. Enai Jiaming was just a celestial realm warrior a moment ago. But in the blink of an eye, his strength had skyrocketed and he had blasted Vincent away. Lord Zhao, what's going on? Thousand Flowing Kill had no time to care about Vincent's life or death. He looked at the dark demonic dragon in the sky and asked in horror. Zhao Zi gulped and his face was equally horrified. He said in a daze, He seems to be awakening a power in his body. This power is too terrifying. I can't resist it at all. Boom, boom, boom. Just as Zhao Zi spoke, the dark demon dragon went berserk. Its huge body tumbled in the air, and waves of terrifying dragon chi wreaked havoc in the space. The heavens and the earth trembled, and the space seemed like it was going to collapse in the next moment. Oh no! Nie Tian's heart skipped a beat when he saw this scene. Enai Jiaming was the reincarnation of the mystical dragon demon saint. He was most likely an expert at the pinnacle of the divine state in his previous life. If the power in his body was completely awakened, it would be a piece of cake for him to destroy this world. What was more terrifying was that Enai Jiaming was in a berserk state and seemed unable to control himself. Nie Tian looked back at Vincent, who was blasted away by the dark demonic dragon, and couldn't help but gasp. At this moment, Vincent's entire body was drenched in blood and badly mutilated, and he was in an extremely sorry state. He didn't have the arrogant and domineering attitude from before any longer, and he had a pitiable appearance. The dark demonic dragon was too powerful. Just the pressure of its aura alone had almost destroyed a mid-stage low-god expert. Nie Tian knew that this was definitely not the limit of Enai Jiaming's strength. It seemed that the dark demonic dragon had just awakened. I have to stop him. Nie Tian's eyes suddenly darkened and an extremely determined look emerged in his eyes. If Enai Jiaming's power was completely awakened, not only would he die, the entire Divine Frost City or even the entire Heaven Realm might be implicated. Nie Tian didn't have a clear understanding of the strength of the peak of the immortal state, but he felt that it should be easy for a peak supreme god to destroy a plain world. With this thought in mind, Nie Tian didn't dare to delay any longer. His body trembled, and the meteor wings appeared on his back. Sir, what are you doing? Seeing Nie Tian's actions, Nie Qiu, who was by the side, was startled. He immediately reacted, his face changed, and his expression became sluggish. Nie Qiu reacted, Nie Tian actually wanted to stop Nie Jianming. Nie Qiu, leave first. Nie Tian let out a low roar. After which, the power of the stars gushed out from his body and condensed into an astral shield. With a flap of his wings, he dashed towards Nie Jianming. Nie Jianming had already gone completely mad, and he roared furiously like a savage, ferocious beast. His face was savage and terrifying, and his entire body emitted a terrifying aura. Boom! Nie Tian's figure moved, and he dashed towards Nie Jianming. However, when he was 1,000 meters away from Nie Jianming, he felt the pressure of an enormous and boundless aura, which he couldn't bear. With a loud bang, the shield around him shattered. Nie Tian let out a muffled groan, and he was sent flying, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Nie Tian. Seeing this scene, everyone couldn't help but exclaim. Thousand Flowing Kill's face was gloomy, and he laughed sinisterly. Nie Tian, even Vincent can't bear the pressure of that kid's aura, and you still dare to rush forward? Aren't you courting death? Shut up! Before he finished speaking, Zhao Zi scolded coldly and glared at him. Zhao Zi understood that Nie Tian wanted to stop the awakening of the power in Nie Jianming's body. He didn't know what the power in Nie Jianming's body was, but it was definitely a power that could destroy heaven and earth. Thinking of this, Zhao Zi stomped his feet, and his figure dashed over. He had to help Nie Tian. Nie Tian's figure stabilized, and his face was pale and bloodless. His expression was even more horrified. Nie Jianming's power was too terrifying, and Nie Tian couldn't even bear the pressure of the former's aura. Moreover, Nie Tian sensed that the aura around Nie Jianming was still skyrocketing. If it continued, he might really rush to the peak of the immortal state. Phew! Nie Tian let out a long breath, and his complexion turned slightly better. Mr. Nie Tian. At this time, Zhao Zi's figure appeared next to Nie Tian, and he asked in a deep voice, "Who is this person? How can there be such a terrifying power in his body?" "He is the reincarnation of the ancient demon saint, and he is awakening the memory of his previous life." Nie Tian nodded and said, "The reincarnation of the ancient demon saint?" Zhao Zi was stunned, and he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. The strength of the ancient demon saint was at least at the same level as those old monsters in the territory. It was definitely an expert at the peak of the immortal state. No wonder there was such a terrifying power in his body. "Mr. Zhao, we have to stop him from awakening his memory." Nie Tian's face was solemn, and he said heavily. "Okay." Zhao Zi nodded and said, "I will break through his aura for you, and let you get close to him." Zhao Zi guessed that since Nie Tian wanted to get close to Nie Jianming, he must have a way to calm the latter down. "Okay," Nie Tian agreed, and the wings on his back moved, and he turned into a black light and flew over. Zhao Zi followed behind him, and he opened the god's domain around him, and pressed towards Nie Jianming. Boom, boom, boom. The next moment, two terrifying forces collided, and a terrifying roar sounded in the air. Dark clouds rolled between heaven and earth, and the sky became dark, as if it was the end of the world. Zhao Zi was indeed a middle deity expert, and his strength was far better than Vincent's. He used the god's domain to break through the dragon qi around Nie Jianming. This is a good chance. Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and he dashed towards Nie Jianming. Get lost. However, at this moment, Nie Jianming had already gone mad. His eyes were bloodshot, and his eyes were full of ferocity. He roared and slapped his palm. Seeing this, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and he moved his body a few hundred meters to the side, and barely avoided the huge palm power. However, he was still affected by the palm power. He felt a terrifying force rushing towards him, and he wanted to resist, but he couldn't control his body, and he was sent flying away. Go to hell. Immediately, Nie Jianming's eyes revealed a murderous look, and he slapped his palm. A huge force came crashing down towards Nie Tian. Mr. Nyetian. Zhao Zi was stunned when he saw this scene. He was so scared that his face turned pale, and his forehead was dripping with cold sweat. And I Jianming's strength was too strong. When this palm fell, even he couldn't withstand it, let alone Nyetian. There was no doubt that if I Jianming's palm hit Nyetian, the latter would definitely die. The sudden scene made everyone's heart tighten, and they looked at the sky in horror. Kill him, kill him, kill him! Flowing kill screamed in his heart, and his eyes became fiery. It was as if he could already see the scene of Nyetian being killed with one palm. Chapter 1354. At the critical moment, Nye Yuro released a 7-colored halo that flowed in the air like a light wave. At this moment, I Jiaming was affected by the power of the phantom seal. He screamed, and the huge handprint in the air suddenly disappeared. When Nye Tian felt the pressure on his body dissipate and his body return to normal, he couldn't help but look at Nye Yuro in astonishment. It seemed that Nye Yuro's 1,000-gem phantom seal had a certain effect on I Jiaming. Roar, follow me! Having no time to think, Nye Tian roared in a low voice, before charging towards I Jiaming once again. Nye Yuro's figure was just as fast as Nye Tian's. She followed closely behind Nye Tian, her body constantly releasing 7-colored light. I Jiaming was affected by the power of the phantom seal. He held his head with both hands and screamed, "Absolute confinement!" Nye Tian's figure came to a place about 100 meters away from I Jiaming. His eyes flickered and the starry eye opened. At the same time, holographic divine runes filled the air and a huge spiritual deterrent shrouded I Jiaming. I Jiaming felt his divine sense being attacked, and he let out a shrill cry. He raised his head abruptly, and his eyes were scarlet red, sinister, and ferocious to the extreme. In the next moment, he suddenly released a huge wave of renegade dragon chi around him. In the void above, the dark demon dragon was summoned and came crashing down. Nye Tian looked up and saw the colossal creature over his head. He had an ominous feeling. I Jiaming, don't hurt brother Nye Tian. At this moment, Nye Yuro's figure appeared like a hurricane and shouted anxiously. I Jiaming's eyes trembled violently. He seemed to recognize the face in front of him, and his red eyes calmed down in an instant. Roar! The dark demonic dragon threw its head back and roared furiously. Its body tumbled and charged into the void. Boom! A thunderous explosion rang out in the sky tens of thousands of meters away. A space-time crack that was several thousand meters wide appeared in the sky. From afar, the sky seemed to be torn apart. A terrible space-time storm surged out and the world suddenly fell into darkness. The dark demonic dragon's massive body was enveloped by the space-time storm. In the blink of an eye, it was torn to shreds, and the violent dragon renegade energy surged into the space-time rift. At the same time, I Jiaming's body trembled and he fainted. Nye Tian's figure moved, and he hugged I Jiaming. He lifted his head to look at the crack in the sky, and his heart was filled with shock. A casual strike from the tenebrous demonic dragon tore through the sky. Such power was unimaginable. If the tenebrous demonic dragon had attacked just now, Nye Tian wouldn't have survived even if he had 10 lives. Everyone looked up at the space-time rift in the sky, their faces filled with shock. After a long time, the space-time rift gradually closed up under the operation of the space-time laws and disappeared. Brother Nye Tian, is I Jiaming all right? At this moment, Nye Yuro walked over and asked anxiously. He should be fine. Nye Tian heaved a sigh of relief and said lightly. He could sense that I Jiaming's aura was still there and it was very strong. However, Nye Tian was a little puzzled by what had just happened. The tenebrous demonic dragon had the chance to kill him, but it suddenly stopped. Nye Yuro's appearance seemed to have awakened I Jiaming instantly. The tenebrous demonic dragon created the space-time rift, and it was clearly self-destructing. I Jiaming would rather hurt himself than hurt Ro Air, Nye Tian said in his heart. He couldn't help but look at Nyeyuro, and his lips curled into a smile. Nye Tian landed with an eye jamming, and without caring about the others, he went straight to a small courtyard. Nye Tian, how is jamming? And Chen walked over at this moment, looking worried. She had seen everything that had happened just now. If it wasn't for Nye Tian, and jamming would definitely have died. I'm not sure about his current situation. You should come and take a look. Nye Tian nodded slightly, sent an jamming to the room, and then waited outside the room. At this moment, Jean de Bao, Qiushan, and the others had arrived outside the small courtyard. They were relieved to see that Nye Tian was fine. I hope this bastard is fine. Nyeyuro's little face was worried, and she finally muttered. This bastard seems to care a lot about you. Nye Tian heard Nyeyuro's words and couldn't help but laugh. And Jamming's memory had suddenly awakened because Vincent had said some blasphemous words to Nyeyuro. He was able to regain his composure later because of Nyeyuro's appearance. From this, it could be seen that Jamming cared a lot about Nyeyuro. Nye Tian knew that during the time Nyeyuro and the others were in the Sumi world, Chen and Jamming had been with them. It wasn't strange for a young man and a young woman to develop feelings for each other after being together for a long time. As for Nyeyuro saying that she would marry Nye Tian when she grew up, it was just child's talk. Nye Tian had never taken it seriously. If Nyeyuro could be with Jamming, it would definitely be a good thing. After a while, Chen walked out of the room, but her expression was very strange. Sister Zichen, is Jamming okay? Nyeyuro was the most nervous and stepped forward to ask. He's fine. Chen frowned and forced a smile. Go in and see him. Nyeyuro nodded and went straight into the room. After confirming that Jamming was fine, Nye Tian let out a long sigh of relief. But he could see that Zichen seemed to have something to say, so he said, Miss Zichen, let's talk in private. There were too many people here, so it wasn't strange that Zichen had something to say. Nye Tian smiled faintly and let Jean de Bao and Qiushan leave first. Not long after, Nye Tian and Zichen came to a separate room. Miss Zichen, did something happen to Jamming? Nye Tian didn't beat around the bush and asked directly. Yes, Jamming's current situation is indeed a bit strange. Zichen nodded and said with a solemn and complicated expression, I found out that the power of the absolute shadow prohibition in his body seems to have weakened a lot. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he suddenly fell into deep thought. The people of the Dragon Rebel clan all had the absolute shadow prohibition in their bodies. Because of the existence of this prohibition, the people of the Dragon Rebel clan didn't dare to increase their strength, because once their strength increased, the power of the prohibition would also become stronger. So Zichen and Jamming's strength were only in the celestial realm. Without the absolute shadow prohibition, with their talent, they could at least step into the celestial emperor realm. Is it the power of the 1,000-gem phantom seal? Nye Tian murmured with a frown. He had seen that Jamming was affected by the 1,000-gem phantom seal and was briefly awake. It seemed that the 1,000-gem phantom seal had some kind of influence on him. Thinking of this, Nye Tian basically concluded that it was the power of the 1,000-gem phantom seal that weakened the absolute shadow prohibition in Jamming's body. Besides that, what else? Nye Tian couldn't help but continue to ask when he saw Zichen lowering his head in silence. It seems. Zichen's eyes flickered. He hesitated, but finally said, It seems that some of Jamming's memories have been awakened this time. After he calmed down, those awakened memories weren't sealed. Just now, he kept shouting things like Dragon Spring Veins and World Origin. It's very strange. Chapter 1355. In the room, Nye Tian's eyes darkened and his expression froze at the mention of the vein of Dragon Spring. Oh! Zichen was surprised by Nye Tian's reaction and asked, You know about the vein of Dragon Spring? Yes. Nye Tian nodded and said, The The vein of Dragon Spring was the most precious treasure of the divine dragon tribe in the olden times. The divine dragon tribe was born from the vein of Dragon Spring. But hundreds of thousands of years ago, the vein of Dragon Spring disappeared. The divine dragon tribe declined and was finally destroyed by the dragon rebel tribe. Nietian didn't hide anything and didn't mind. I see. And Zichen frowned and said, "It seems that the vein of Dragon Spring is related to the survival of the dragon tribe. Why did Jianming mention it when he was in a coma? I find it strange too." Nietian's expression was also complicated. He had a guess in his mind. Since the divine dragon tribe was destroyed by the dragon rebel tribe, it was very likely that the vein of Dragon Spring was stolen by the dragon rebel tribe. Are you suspecting that Lord Monster Saint took the vein of Dragon Spring? And Zichen's eyes flashed and she asked directly. Yes. Nietian nodded and didn't hide anything. He said directly, "Miss Zichen, do you know about the Guardian family?" "How do you know about the Guardian family?" And Zichen's eyes trembled and she asked. Nietian was surprised and then smiled. "It seems that you also know about the Guardian family. Tell me about it." And Zichen frowned and became silent, as if she was thinking about something. "Miss Zichen, I am not the fated one in your prophecy, but I have a connection with the dragon tribe. We can't hide what the dragon rebel tribe did back then. Why don't you tell us honestly? Maybe we can find a solution," Nietian said sincerely, looking at an Zichen. And Zichen looked up at Nietian and hesitated for a long time. Finally, she said, "The Guardian family is a mysterious organization founded by Lord Monster Saint hundreds of thousands of years ago. Its mission is to protect something very important. Rumor has it that this thing concerns the survival of the world." Nietian nodded slightly. And Zichen's words were basically the same as what he had heard from the Sword Elder. However, from Zichen's tone, she knew very little about the Guardian family. She did not know what the Guardian family wanted to protect. The Guardian clan was a mysterious and powerful organization. According to the Sword Elder, this organization should be in a different space. Back then, the Myriad Demon Dragon Head was a traitor of the Guardian clan. Nietian frowned and said inwardly, "The Guardian family. Once I enter the Realmverse, I must dig out this organization." He was now 70 to 80% sure that what the Protector family was guarding was the Dragon Spring vein. But even now, Nietian still didn't know what the Dragon Spring vein was, or what its essence was. Just what kind of thing could give birth to such a powerful life form like the divine dragon race? World Source. Suddenly, these words appeared in Nietian's mind, causing his face to darken. Just now, Zichen said that Jianming not only mentioned the Dragon Spring vein, but also the World Source when he was unconscious. Then, could the Dragon Spring vein be one of the World Source? Nietian had read about the World Source in ancient books. It was said to be a magical existence that could create a world. The space-time crystal in his hand that had merged with the divine demon origin embryo might be a fragment of the space-time origin. A small fragment could directly devour the space-time apocalypse, which showed how powerful the world source was. Since the Dragon Spring vein could give birth to the divine dragon race, its power was unimaginable. It was very likely that it was one of the world source. However, regarding the world source, Nietian only knew of its existence and nothing else. The Protector family, the Dragon Spring vein, the world source, these things were all mysteries, which made Nietian feel that the world was endless. "Miss Zichen, what else did Jianming say when he was unconscious?" Nietian continued to ask. Zichen thought for a moment and basically repeated what Jianming said. Nietian was confused and didn't find any information that interested him. Apart from this, everything else about Jianming is normal. Nietian nodded slightly. "It's not normal." Zichen's small face was full of worry and her eyes were a little complicated. She frowned and said, Jamming's strength seems to have increased, and there is no sign of it disappearing. Nie Tian was stunned and couldn't help but exclaim, "What do you mean?" He knew that when Ni Jamming awakened, his strength would also increase. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to send Vincent flying. But previously, when Ni Jamming returned to normal, his strength would return to its original level. If his strength didn't decline this time, it would be really terrifying. Jamming's strength seems to be much stronger than before. I can't determine his current strength. Ni Zichen frowned and said in a deep voice. She couldn't determine whether this was a good thing or a bad thing for Ni Jamming. This? Nie Tian gasped and his whole body stiffened for a few seconds. The strength that Ni Jamming displayed before was definitely at the level of an intermediate deity or even an upper deity. If his strength didn't decline, wouldn't he already have the strength of an upper deity? This was too terrifying. Nie Tian, are you okay? Ni Zichen couldn't help but ask when she saw Nie Tian's reaction. She didn't know the strength of the godly state and didn't know much about it, so she didn't know what Nie Tian was thinking. I want to see Ni Jamming. Nie Tian stood up and said in a deep voice. Okay. Ni Zichen didn't know what happened, but she saw that Nie Tian's reaction wasn't right. She thought that something had happened to Ni Jamming, so she agreed and became nervous. Nie Tian and Ni Zichen walked out of the room and went directly to the room where Ni Zichen was. When they entered the room, Nie Yuro was taking care of Ni Jamming, who hadn't woken up yet. Brother Nie Tian, sister Ni Zichen, you're here. Nie Yuro thought that Nie Tian and Ni Zichen had come to see Ni Jamming. She smiled faintly and said with some pride, Ni Jamming called my name when he was unconscious. Rower, did he say anything else? Nie Tian looked at Nie Yuro and asked solemnly. No. Nie Yuro shook her head and noticed that Nie Tian's mood wasn't right. She couldn't help but frown and asked, Brother Nie Tian, did something happen to Ni Jamming? It's nothing. Nie Tian motioned for Nie Yuro not to be nervous. He took a step forward and came to Ni Jamming's side. He activated the holographic divine glyphs and carefully sensed the aura in Ni Jamming's body. After a while, Nie Tian let out a long breath, but his face was extremely shocked. Ni Zichen was right. Ni Jamming's strength had indeed not declined. Realizing this, Nie Tian's whole body stiffened. With his current knowledge, he couldn't determine what Ni Jamming's current strength was. Get Zhao Zi to come and take a look. After a while, Nie Tian finally reacted and walked out of the room. Chapter 1356. After a while, Nie Tian went to look for Zhao Zi. In the room, Zhao Zi gasped and stared at Ni Jamming in astonishment. He opened his mouth wide but couldn't say a word for a long time. Lord Zhao, what is the strength of my friend now? Nie Tian asked in surprise when he saw Zhao Zi's unusual reaction. I can't sense it. Zhao Zi gulped and said, This lord is definitely above the midstage of the deity stage, and may even be a high god. Indeed. Although Nie Tian had expected this, he was still shocked when he heard it from Zhao Zi. Ni Jamming's strength had actually increased to the divine state, and he even reached the midstage or high god level. This was too terrifying. Nie Tian stood still for a long time before he finally reacted. Thinking of the huge spatial rift that was created when the dark demonic dragon self-destructed, Nie Tian still had some lingering fear. Lord Zhao, thank you very much. Nie Tian became cold and thanked Zhao Zi. He then asked, How is Vincent? Nie Tian didn't have a good impression of Vincent. He just wanted to make sure that Vincent wouldn't do anything out of line again. He's badly injured and will probably need at least a few months to recover. Zhao Zi smiled bitterly and said with some guilt on his face, Vincent is an eccentric person and doesn't know the severity of his actions. If he has done anything wrong, please forgive him, Mr. Nie Tian. Nie Tian laughed but didn't say anything. Nie Tian wouldn't pursue what happened before, but if Vincent dared to do anything wrong again, Nie Tian wouldn't let him live. Nie Tian was confident that even if he hadn't advanced to the divine state, he could still kill Vincent with Nie Chio's strength. If it wasn't for Ni Jianming suddenly going berserk, he would have destroyed Vincent's body. Zhao Zi immediately took his leave and left the room. Nie Tian sensed for a while and made sure that Ni Jianming's aura was stable. He then left. Ni Jianming was in a coma and no one knew when he would wake up. Nie Tian had a question in his heart. If Ni Jianming's strength did not decline, would his awakened memories not be sealed? In that case, Ni Jianming would really become the mysterious dragon demon saint. Thinking of this, Nie Tian's heart couldn't help but tremble, and his expression changed. 3 days later, Nie Tian summoned Li Yi, Tang Hao, and the others. The new 9 emperors would be officially established. A group of people had gathered in the divine cold palace. Nie Tian walked into the main hall. He also wanted to join in the fun on such an important day. Teacher. Li Yi Tang Hao stood behind Nie Tian and respectfully called out, Sir. Yi Linyun and Qiu Shan bowed slightly to Nie Tian, their faces filled with excitement. They never thought that one day they would be able to come to the heaven realm and become the legendary 9 emperors. Nie Tian. When Chen Jini saw Nie Tian again, his face was filled with sorrow and joy. Nie, Mr. Nie. Nie Wenyuan saw Nie Tian walking over and his face was filled with excitement. He didn't know how to address Nie Tian. Great Elder, you can just call me Nie Tian. Nie Tian smiled faintly, his expression calm. Nie Tian. Nie Wenyuan's voice trembled as he stammered. At that moment, he felt like he was dreaming. Everything was so unreal. A few years ago, the family head who was called Trash, the youth who was ridiculed by the Mo family, was now standing at the peak of the entire plain world. And he, an elder of a third-rate family in a third-rate empire in the lower plain world, was actually going to be called the 9 emperors of the heaven realm. Nie Wenyuan looked at everything in the divine cold palace with a dazed expression. That expression seemed to be saying, Am I really not dreaming? Great Elder, the Nie family will be relying on you in the future. Nie Tian looked at Nie Wenyuan and smiled faintly. When he reincarnated, the Nie family was in a precarious situation. At that time, he said that the Nie family would definitely rise because of him. And now, he had done it. The ruined family of the third-rate city would become the super family of the entire heaven realm. Nie Wenyuan was so excited that he didn't know what to say and just nodded. A moment later, Zhao Zi and the other 2 adjudicators appeared. When Zhao Zi saw Li Yi and the others, he realized that the 6 people Nie Tian chose were actually so weak. Zhao Zi couldn't help but look at Nie Tian and understood that Nie Tian clearly wanted to use the power of the Crimson Moon Divine Palace to raise the strength of the 6 people in front of him to the peak of Heavenly Emperor. Nie Tian, are these the 6 emperors you chose? Thousand Flowing Kill's face sank when he saw Li Yi and the others, and he asked Nie Tian coldly. Are you not satisfied? Nie Tianling laughed, extremely provocative. Anyway, it didn't matter whether Thousand Flowing Kill was satisfied or not. Nie Tian wouldn't care about his attitude. The 9 emperors are people who stand at the peak of the heaven realm. The strongest among them has only just stepped into the heavenly emperor realm. Are you looking down on the adjudicators and the Crimson Moon Divine Palace by finding these people to be the 9 emperors? Thousand Flowing Kill's face was gloomy, and he looked at Li Yi and the others with disdain. The expressions of Li Yi and the others turned a little ugly. After all, they were indeed very weak. Thousand Flowing Kill, since Lord Zhao asked me to appoint the new 6 emperors, then I have the right to choose anyone. Nie Tianling looked at Thousand Flowing Kill coldly and said solemnly, If you're not satisfied with my choice, you can tell Lord Zhao. There's no need to bark here. Nie Tian, you. Thousand Flowing Kill frowned, and his face directly turned the color of an eggplant, as ugly as one could get. He didn't expect that Nie Tian would actually use Zhao Zi to suppress him. Thousand Flowing Kill, don't say any more. Zhao Zi finally spoke up. He glared at Thousand Flowing Kill cold and said, "These 6 people that Mr. Nye Tian appointed might be a little weak, but their talent is not bad. As long as they consume the heavenly essence God pill that Lord Palace Lord personally refined, their strength will be able to reach the peak of Heavenly Emperor within 3 months. My lord, I just feel that using the heavenly essence God pill on these trash is really a reckless waste of God's gift." Thousand Flowing Kill suddenly raised his head and said with a look of contempt, "Slap." Just as Thousand Flowing Kill's voice had yet to fade, a palm force suddenly flashed past in the air. Following that, a crisp sound echoed out. Half of Thousand Flowing Kill's face immediately became red and swollen. The sudden sound made everyone stupefied, becoming stunned in unison. A slap. Everyone immediately reacted. The sound just now was actually a slap. Furthermore, it was slapped on Thousand Flowing Kill's face. The person who made the move was precisely Nye Tian. Thousand Flowing Kill himself was also stunned for a moment, only coming back to his senses after a good few seconds. His gaze suddenly trembled, and his expression was grim until it was practically dripping water. He never would have thought that Nye Tian actually dared to slap him in public. Who was he? He was a deity realm martial artist, a genius of the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. This sort of humiliation, how could he tolerate it? Chapter 1357. In the main hall, everyone could feel the immense killing intent from Thousand Flowing Kill. Their hearts leaped to their throats, and they were extremely nervous. No one had expected that Nye Tian would suddenly slap Thousand Flowing Kill. Even though it wasn't a killing move, it was still a great humiliation. No matter what, Thousand Flowing Kill was a God Realm martial artist, and a member of the Red Moon Divine Palace, with the identity of an adjudicator. Wasn't Nye Tian going a little overboard? Thousand Flowing Kill, are you very angry? Nye Tian looked at Thousand Flowing Kills, who was brimming with killing intent, with a mocking look on his face, and said indifferently, "You are a God Realm martial artist, but facing me, a Heavenly Emperor martial artist, you are humiliated by me in public, yet you dare not make a move. Tell me, aren't you worse than trash?" The indifferent voice sounded, but it carried a deeper humiliation. Nye Tian could see that Thousand Flowing Kill did not dare to make a move at this moment, because the latter knew that he was not Nye Tian's match. Thousand Flowing Kill had seen the battle between Nye Tian and Vincent, and even Vincent's body was almost destroyed by Nye Tian. His strength was far inferior to Vincent, so how would he dare to make a move against Nye Tian? In fact, Thousand Flowing Kill was not afraid of Nye Tian, but Nye Chio, who was hidden in Nye Tian's body. Until now, he still had not figured out the relationship between Nye Tian and Nye Chio. Thousand Flowing Kill, since you don't dare to make a move, then shut up and stop shouting. Nye Tianling looked at Thousand Flowing Kill coldly, and growled. His voice was like thunder, resounding in the main hall. Every word of Nye Tian's was like a crisp slap on Thousand Flowing Kill's face. After Nye Tian finished speaking, he did not look at Thousand Flowing Kill, but said to Zhao Zi, "Lord Zhao, let's continue." Zhao Zi was stunned, and only reacted after a long time, and nodded in shock. The shock that Nye Tian gave Zhao Zi was too great. The latter did not expect that Nye Tian, who looked modest and gentle on the surface, would be so domineering when angered. I must never offend this person in the future. Zhao Zi glanced at Nye Tian with lingering fear and said in his heart. Next, Zhao Zi gave the heavenly essence God pills to Li Yi and the others. At the same time, she gave Mao Xianglong and the others new 9 emperor tokens. From this moment onwards there were 9 new emperors in the divine realm of the heaven realm. A new era had begun in the heaven realm, and it was the era of the Frost Emperor. Everyone was extremely happy, and only Thousand Flow Killer's expression was extremely gloomy. He frequently glanced at Nye Tian, and he wished for nothing more than to burn Nye Tian's bones and scatter the dust. Nye Tian. A moment later, just as the crowd was about to disperse, Thousand Flowing Kill's voice suddenly rang out. Everyone was slightly taken aback and looked at Thousand Flowing Kill. What? Nye Tian turned around and sneered. He said mockingly, "Do you think the slap just now wasn't loud enough?" Thousand Flowing Kill's eyes trembled, and his body became even colder. He said in a low voice, "You killed my teacher, Lord Snow Emperor. So what?" Nye Tian raised his brows and said arrogantly, "With your current strength, do you want revenge?" Back then in the divine realm of the Heaven Realm, Nye Tian's prestige far surpassed Thousand Flowing Kills. More than 100 years had passed. Thousand Flowing Kill cultivated in the God Awakening domain and finally condensed his godhead, advancing to the deity realm. But unfortunately, after Nye Tian was reborn, he also reached the peak of the Heavenly Emperor realm. In addition to the various strange powers in his body, he still firmly suppressed Thousand Flowing Kill. Thousand Flowing Kill was not Nye Tian's match. "I won't kill you because your life belongs to another person." The corners of Thousand Flowing Kill's mouth curled up, and he smiled coldly. He said, "Before I came, Xue Wushuang asked me to pass a message to you on his behalf." Xue Wushuang. Hearing this name, Nye Tian's brows furrowed slightly, and then he said with a smile, "What message?" Since Thousand Flowing Kill knew everything, Xue Wushuang definitely knew too. Nye Tian estimated that Xue Wushuang's current strength was definitely stronger than Thousand Flowing Kill. Back in the Heaven Realm, Xue Wushuang far surpassed Thousand Flowing Kill, and was even not much weaker than Nye Tian. Now that this person had cultivated in the God Awakening domain for more than 100 years, his strength was naturally stronger. More importantly, Nye Tian knew that Xue Wushuang looked like a gentleman on the surface, but was extremely despicable behind his back. This point perfectly inherited the talent of bullying Xue Lingtian. "Xue Wushuang knows that you will definitely go to the domain, and he wants to have a life-and-death battle with you." Thousand Flowing Kill smiled coldly, and his eyes revealed killing intent. "Life-and-death battle?" Nye Tian's gaze turned slightly intent, but then he laughed and said, "A fine life-and-death battle." Xue Wushuang entered the God Awakening domain for more than 100 years. With his talent, his current strength is at least middle stage low God, right? If I enter the domain, I'll be peak Heavenly Emperor at most. Asking me to have a life-and-death battle with him, he really has the cheek to propose it. A deity realm martial artist and a Heavenly Emperor realm martial artist, such a request was indeed somewhat shameless. But Xue Wushuang and Nye Tian had the enmity of killing his father. Proposing such a battle was not considered too strange. Nonsense. At this time, Nye Tian had just finished speaking when Zhao Zi rebuked angrily. Looking at Thousand Flowing Kill, he said, "According to what this seat knows, after Xue Wushuang joined the Divine Palace, he only used 20 years' time to condense his divine spark. Currently, his strength is at least late-stage low God. To have a life-and-death battle with a Heavenly Emperor powerhouse with such strength, isn't this making things difficult for others? 20 years. Xue Wushuang actually only used 20 years to condense his divine spark." When the others heard Zhao Zi's words, they did not have any reaction. They did not have much understanding of divine sparks. But Nye Tian's expression froze all at once, his shock not small. He did not think that Xue Wushuang's talent was actually so terrifying, only using 20 years to condense his divine spark. Nye Tian found out from Yi Qinghai that divine spark was extremely hard to condense. Ordinary martial artists needed over 1,000 years to condense their divine spark. Genius martial artists needed several hundred years. Monstrous-level geniuses needed around 100 years. Like Xue Wushuang, who condensed his divine spark within 20 years, that was a supreme-level monster. It seemed like Xue Wushuang was much more terrifying than Nye Tian imagined. "Lord Zhao, this is a matter between Xue Wushuang and Nye Tian. I hope that you don't interfere." Unexpectedly, Thousand Flowing Kill actually shot Zhao Zi a cold glance, not shrinking back in the slightest. Following that, Thousand Flowing Kill looked at Nye Tian, smiled mockingly and said, "Nye Tian, are you scared?" "Scared?" Nye Tian came back to his senses, smiled coldly, and said, "I am indeed a little scared, but that doesn't mean that I will refuse. Isn't it just a battle of life and death? Go back and tell Shui Wushuang to wash his neck and wait for me. When I arrive at the astonishing god territory, I will fight with him." His arrogant voice resounded in the hall, sounding extremely domineering. Everyone was stunned. They did not expect Nye Tian to agree so quickly. Although they did not know Shui Wushuang's current strength, they could tell from Zhao Zi's reaction that it must be very terrifying. "Nye Tian, you really agree?" Thousand Flowing Kill was stunned for a few seconds before he reacted, and shouted in joy. "Yes, I agree." Nye Tian smiled with a calm expression. "Great." Thousand Flowing Kill finally reacted and laughed out loud in excitement and shouted, "Shui Wushuang will definitely wait for you. I hope you won't let him wait for too long." Looking at Thousand Flowing Kill, who was almost crazy, Nye Tian shook his head with a bitter smile, and his face was full of disdain. However, at this moment, Zhao Zi, who was standing to the side, had an ugly expression on his face. He thought to himself, "It's over this time." Shui Wushuang and Nye Tian were both important candidates for the Crimson Moon Divine Palace to participate in the grand competition of the 12 Shrines. If the two of them were to have a battle of life and death, it would be bad for the Crimson Moon Divine Palace regardless of the outcome. Chapter 1358. In the Grand Hall, Zhao Zi looked at Nye Tian with a helpless expression. Nye Tian was indeed domineering, but sometimes he was a little too domineering. He dared to take on everything. Zhao Zi knew that Shui Wushuang's strength was far beyond Wissen's 1,000 Flowing Kills. This was not only because of Shui Wushuang's terrifying talent, but also because he had an extremely terrifying teacher. It seemed that even the Crimson Moon Palace Master was somewhat afraid of Shui Wushuang's teacher. "It seems that I have to return to the Divine Palace as soon as possible and let the Palace Lord know everything. If this matter is not handled well, it will be over," Zhao Zi said in his heart, his expression grave. The life-death duel between Nye Tian and Shui Wushuang was not only because of the powerful figures behind them, but also because of the upcoming grand competition of the 12 Shrine. The grand competition of the 12 Divine Palaces was a major event that concerned the survival of the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. Zhao Zi remembered that there were only 3 months left until the grand competition of the 12 Shrine Palaces, and whether the Red Moon Divine Palace could retain its position as one of the 12 shrines depended on Nye Tian. With Nye Tian's strength, he would definitely be able to obtain the top 3 of the Heavenly Emperor rankings. In fact, Zhao Zi felt that Nye Tian was virtually invincible in the Heavenly Emperor realm. It was very normal for him to obtain the Heavenly Emperor rankings champion. "Qianlu Sha, go back and tell Shui Wushuang that I won't let him wait too long." Nye Tian glanced at Zhao Zi with a faint smile and a strange look in his eyes. The reason why he agreed to Shui Wushuang's challenge was not only because he was forced by the situation, but also because he was very confident. It had been almost half a year since he had fused with the Heart of Nothingness, and he could feel the destructive power of the Heart of Nothingness growing day by day. Therefore, the first thing Nye Tian had to do after entering the shocking god territory was to find the boundary of the first demonic fire universe. Before the power of the stars was completely awakened, only the boundary of the universe could suppress the Heart of Nothingness. As long as he could integrate the boundaries of the universe, Nye Tian had the confidence to advance to the immortal state. He already had the spirit bright power in his body, it was just that he couldn't fuse it together, so he couldn't condense his godhood. If the universe's boundary isn't in a planar world, then it must be in a territory. I just don't know if it's in the God Awakening territory. Nye Tian muttered to himself. He could only pray that the universe's boundary was in the God Awakening territory. In the past few months, Nye Tian had looked through a large number of ancient books, but he did not find any information about the universe's boundary. Furthermore, he had obtained a few other devil fire diagrams from the Dan Emperor, but he did not find any trace of the universe's boundary. This undoubtedly meant that the boundary of the universe was not in the divine realm of the heaven realm, but in the realms. Actually, after Nye Tian had fused with the heart of nothingness, his perception of demonic fire had become very strong, especially towards the boundaries of the universe. The boundary of the universe and the heart of nothingness were born together, so there was a natural connection between the two. Nye Tian, you're too arrogant. Since you've met Shui Wushuang, there's only one ending for you, a death. The 1,000 flowing killers looked cold at Nye Tian. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he uttered the last word, die. Then, he turned around and left. Mr. Nye Tian, the matter with the 9 monarchs has come to an end. I will be leaving now. I hope you can enter the God realm as soon as possible. I will be waiting for you at the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. Zhao Zi took a step forward and said, as for Shui Wushuang, you don't have to worry about it. I will report this to the Palace Lord, and he will deal with it personally. Mr. Zhao, thank you for your kindness. Nye Tian smiled faintly and said, let me handle the matter between me and Shui Wushuang myself. I hope no one else will interfere. Zhao Zi was stunned. He did not expect Nye Tian to say such a thing. What an arrogant kid. Vincent finally could not help but speak. Even I don't dare to provoke Shui Wushuang, yet you want to have a life and death battle with her? You're courting death. Humph. Nye Tian glanced at Vincent and sneered. Who do you think you are? You're just a mad dog that bites anyone you see. You might be afraid of Shui Wushuang, but I'm not. You. Vincent was rendered speechless by Nye Tian's words. His face immediately flushed, and he was speechless for a while. Let me give you a piece of advice. It's better to be sensible. Otherwise, you won't even know how you died. Nye Tian glanced at Vincent and ignored him. Zhao Zi glared at Vincent and signaled him to stop talking. Zhao Zi did not say anything else and immediately left with Vincent. Nye Tian sent Zhao Zi and the others off, then returned to the hall. Frowning, Li Yi stepped forward and asked, Teacher, when do you plan to go to the realm verse? I will go to the realm after I'm done with the matters in the plain world. It will be at least half a month, or at most a month. Nye Tian nodded and said, You can cultivate in the divine realm of the heaven realm for now. I will let you enter the realm soon. Li Yi and the others nodded and did not speak anymore. Nye Tian would leave soon. They would probably be cultivating in seclusion at that time. Zhao Zi left the heavenly essence God pill behind. It would take at least a few months to completely digest the divine pill. Next, Nye Tian chatted with everyone for a while and then dismissed them to return to their own places to cultivate. After a while, Nye Tian came to a small courtyard. Brother Nye Tian, you're here. Nye Yuro forced a smile when she saw Nye Tian, but her face could not hide her worry. Nye Tian nodded and saw Enai Zichen walking over. He asked, Miss Zichen, is Enai Jiaming still not awake? Enai Zichen shook her head and said with a puzzled look, Jiaming's aura is obviously normal, but he just can't wake up. It's too strange. Nye Tian frowned. He was also puzzled. It had been 3 days since Enai Jiaming fell into a coma. He had been in a coma. During this period, Nye Tian came over a few times. He did not pay much attention to it, but now he felt that it was strange. I'll go take a look at Enai Jiaming, Nye Tian said and then entered the room. Enai Jiaming laid on the bed. He had regained his calmness and was very gentle. There was even a smile at the corner of his mouth. It was as though he was a person who was in a deep sleep and had a beautiful dream. Nye Tian took a step forward and closed his eyes. The holographic divine glyphs revolved and he carefully sensed everything in Enai Jiaming's body. After a while, Nye Tian's forehead was covered in sweat and his face was pale. But strangely, he did not sense anything unusual. Jiaming's condition was no different from a normal person, but he was still unconscious. So strange. Nie Tian frowned and his face became strange. Nie Qiu, come and take a look. Nie Tian shook his head. He had a thought and decided to let Nie Qiu take a look. But strangely, Nie Qiu did not respond. Nie Qiu. Nie Tian shouted again, but there was still no response. Nie Qiu was obviously in the three-life stone. There was no reason for him to not hear Nie Tian's words. Huh! Nie Tian frowned. He suddenly thought of something. His heart sank and he exclaimed, could something have happened to Cher? Nie Qiu had always been protecting Cher. It was the crucial moment of Cher's awakening, and she could wake up at any time. Nie Tian, are you all right? And Zichen saw that Nie Tian's expression was strange, and asked. I'm fine, Nie Tian said anxiously. He stepped out into the courtyard and took out the three-life stone. Chapter 1359. In the courtyard, Nie Tian looked at the stone of 3 lives in front of him and was stunned. And Zichen and Nie Yuro walked out and were also stunned. The stone of 3 lives was 10 meters wide and as red as blood. There were blood-colored runes surging on it and circulating in the air. But that was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that the stone of 3 lives was constantly releasing surging sword chi. It was like a mountain or an ocean that spread in all directions. The endless sword chi was like a huge wave that rushed into the sky. The sky was filled with sword shadows, like stars in the sky, flickering incessantly. It was extremely dazzling. The brilliance of the swords shot through the space of 10,000 meters, and the entire heaven and earth seemed to have become a sea of swords. There was a terrifying sword chi everywhere. What a terrifying sword chi! Nie Tian slightly reacted and felt the terrifying sword chi around him. His eyes trembled violently and even became a little dazed. He could not believe what he was seeing. He had seen many sword intents, but he had never seen such a vast sword intent like the one in front of him before. Even when he walked the path of sealed swords, the ink jade dragon sword's chi was not so vast. The stone of 3 lives seemed to contain an ocean of sword chi, and it was constantly releasing terrifying sword chi to the outside world. At this time, the others also felt that something was wrong and rushed over. Teacher, what's going on? Qingju walked over and saw the stone of 3 lives. She was extremely surprised and could not help but ask. Nie Tian shook his head. He did not know what was going on either. After a while, Li Yi, Tang Hao and the others appeared. Boss, where did this red stone come from? Jean de Bao walked over. His brows furrowed as he asked with a shocked expression. Nie Tian shook his head. He was worried about Cher and Nie Qiu's safety, and did not say anything. I want to enter the stone of 3 lives to take a look. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He moved and wanted to enter the stone of 3 lives. But in the next moment a shocking scene appeared. When Nie Tian's figure was a few meters away from the stone of 3 lives, a powerful sword chi barrier appeared. An enormous force appeared, covering the sky and earth, and it was impossible to dodge. Purring! A muffled sound rang out, and Nie Tian's silhouette paused for a moment before he was sent flying. He fell to the ground with a pale face and a mouthful of blood. This! Nie Tian was taken aback by the sudden turn of events, and his face stiffened. He couldn't enter the stone of 3 lives. On the 3 lives stone, there was Nie Tian's soul imprint. This was something that belonged to him. How could he not be able to enter? Nie Tian was aghast and could not react for a long time. The others also looked at Nie Tian in a daze, not knowing what had happened. After a long while, Nie Tian finally calmed down and let out a long breath. Since he cannot enter the 3 life stone, then Nie Qiu definitely cannot come out as well. No wonder when I called out to him, there was no response. At this time, the sword chi outside the stone of 3 lives became even more intense. The surrounding sword chi was so dense that it was almost liquefied. Waves of terrifying sword chi soared into the sky, as though it was trying to break free from the shackles of heaven and earth. Di-Shur Tian, what's going on? Nye Tian became much colder as he roared in his heart. Di-Shur Tian's figure appeared, but his face was slightly solemn as he said, "The physique of 3 lives is about to awaken." What do you mean? Nye Tian frowned and his face was filled with shock. He knew that Cher was about to awaken, but why couldn't he enter the stone of 3 lives? The meridians of 3 lives is not any weaker than the physique of a saint. When her spiritual physique awakens, it directly erases your soul imprint. Di-Shur Tian said with a complicated expression. The meridians of 3 lives has fused with Wan Jian's inheritance. This seat also does not know what will happen next. Nye Tian's eyes trembled violently as he probed with his divine sense. As expected, he realized that the soul imprint he left on the stone of 3 lives was already very weak and was about to disappear. Nye Tian's thoughts moved as he wanted to leave another soul imprint on the stone of 3 lives, but he realized that his divine sense was directly bounced back. There seemed to be a layer of terrifying sword chi barrier outside the stone of 3 lives, which was able to block all external powers. Di-Shur Tian, you said that Cher's meridians of 3 lives has fused with Wan Jian's inheritance. What does this mean? Nye Tian's heart was in a mess. He was worried about Cher and Niechio, and he asked in a low voice. The stone of 3 lives contained Wan Jian's inheritance, which came from an ancient god realm swordsman. Nye Tian knew about this, and he had personally seen Cher absorb Wan Jian's inheritance. He originally thought that Cher would wake up soon and nothing would happen, but he did not expect that the current situation would occur. I don't know either. Di-Shur Tian's expression was very complicated as he said, if the meridians of 3 lives completely fuse with Wan Jian's inheritance, there is a possibility that Wan Jian's bloodline will be born. Wan Jian's bloodline. Hearing these words, Nye Tian frowned again. He did not really understand what Wan Jian's bloodline meant, but he was very clear about the word bloodline. Di-Shur Tian's meaning seemed to be that after Cher awakens, she would directly produce the power of bloodline. The power of bloodline, this was a power that only a powerful martial artist could produce. By fusing their own power into the bloodline, it would be passed down from generation to generation. Cher had just awakened, but she could already produce the power of bloodline. This was too terrifying. Nye Tian, the power of bloodline that I am talking about is not as simple as you think. Di-Shur Tian seemed to know what Nye Tian was thinking and smiled strangely, appearing somewhat sinister. What do you mean? Nye Tian bellowed. Don't be anxious, you will know when you continue watching. Di-Shur Tian laughed bitterly, then his figure disappeared. No matter how Nye Tian shouted, he did not appear again. Damn it! Nye Tian cursed in his heart, but he had no other choice and could only watch quietly. At this moment, Nye Tian could only wait outside. He did not know what was happening inside, and his face was covered with beads of sweat. Actually, he was not too worried about Cher, but he was worried that Niechio would be in danger. The sword intent outside the meridians of 3 lives became more and more intense, faintly condensing into a gigantic sword that connected the heaven and earth, as though it wanted to split the heaven and earth. Boss, your friend seems to still be inside the red stone? At this time, Jean de Bao came to Nye Tian's side and suddenly said, N. Nye Tian frowned and was stunned on the spot. He looked at Jean de Bao with a strange expression. After being stunned for a few seconds, Nye Tian then reacted and exclaimed, You can see the scene inside the meridians of 3 live stone? Jean de Bao nodded his head in astonishment. He thought that the meridians of 3 live stone was transparent and others could see everything inside too. Quickly tell me what's happening inside. Nye Tian immediately reacted and cried out excitedly. Outside the meridians of 3 live stone was a layer of sword intent barrier, blocking all powers. Nye Tian could not sense what was happening inside. But Jean de Bao had the 3,000 Fiend God seals, and could actually sense everything inside the meridians of 3 Lives Stone. The current Jean de Bao already reached 3rd level Heavenly Emperor strength under Nie Tian's help. The 3,000 Fiend God seals within his body were already all awakened. His perception abilities were even stronger than Nie Tian's. Chapter 1360. Jean de Bao held a ball of light in his hand, and images started to appear in the ball of light. At the start, it was very blurry, but it gradually became clearer, until it became very clear. Nie Tian looked at the image in the ball of light, and his gaze turned gloomy. Inside the ball of light, Cher stood in the sky, her entire body filled with a vast sword intent. The sword intent around her surged and churned, as though her entire body was condensed from pure sword intent. At the side, Nie Qiu looked on in astonishment, but he was not injured. Seeing this scene clearly, Nie Tian let out a long breath, and his expression became much more relaxed. I wonder what will happen next. Nie Tian frowned and thought to himself. At the same time, inside the 3 Life Stone, Cher was still unconscious, her figure stood tall in the sky, the sword intent around her surged, and the entire 3 Life Stone seemed to be filled with sword intent. But inside her body there was a shocking change. Endless sword intent was like a raging wave crashing into her body. The 3 Life Meridian continued to absorb the sword intent, and its form gradually changed. The 3 Life Meridian was similar to an ordinary Yuan Meridian, but it was stronger, and its aura was more vast, especially the life energy it was surging. The 3 Life Meridian had runes surging on it. It was extremely strange. When the 3 Life Meridian was first created, Nie Tian could feel that its aura was terrifying, even stronger than the Supreme Dragon Meridian. Its life energy was comparable to the 10th Yuan Meridian in Nie Tian's body, the Star Origin Stone. At that moment, the 3 Life Meridian's form had a shocking change. It became extremely sharp, like a sharp sword. As the 3 Life Meridian absorbed more sword intent, its form became even more similar to a sharp sword. Old Man Sword said that when Lady Cher awakens, I have to inject this seal into her body. If not, something terrible will happen. At that moment, Nie Qiu frowned as he looked at Cher, and muttered to himself. He did not have the time to tell Nie Tian about this matter. Whether or not he should inject the seal into Cher's body made him hesitate. At that time, before the Sword Elder left, he had told Nie Qiu a few things, and left a seal in his body, so that when Cher awakens, he could inject the seal into Cher's body. Nie Qiu realized that he was unable to leave the 3 Life Stone, and could not explain to Nie Tian, causing him to hesitate, whether or not he should inject the seal into Cher's body. That damn Old Man Sword, he did not explain much, and only told me to do it. Nie Qiu muttered to himself. If I do not do as he says, and something terrible happens to Lady Shuer, that will be bad. But if I really insert the seal into Lady Shuer's body and something happens to her, Master will skin me alive. Saying that, Nie Qiu frowned even more, and scolded the Sword Elder in his heart. After hesitating for half a day, Nie Qiu finally made a decision, and said, Old Man Sword, you better not harm me. With that, Nie Qiu's figure flashed. He leapt into the sky and looked at Cher with a passionate gaze. He then slapped down with his palm, and a seal shot out like a ray of light, directly entering Cher's body. After Cher absorbed the seal, there was no reaction at all. It was as if the seal was directly submerged in the sword will and did not have any effect. Outside the Stone of 3 Lives. Nie Tian saw Nie Qiu's actions and frowned. He did not understand. Of course, he did not suspect that Nie Qiu would harm Cher, but felt that it was strange. The Sword Elder must have left something for Nie Qiu. Nie Tian thought for a moment and immediately understood. In the following period of time, the sword intent outside the 3 Lives Stone continued to condense and did not dissipate. Meanwhile, Cher continued to fuse Wan Jian legacy with the 3 Lives Meridians. After half a day, the situation was still the same. Cher has not woken up yet. Nye Tian was getting impatient, his expression was tensed up, causing him to feel uncomfortable. The others also watched quietly, not even daring to breathe loudly. Just at that moment, Cher, who was inside the 3 lives stone, finally made a move. Bang! High up in the sky inside the 3 lives stone, Cher's body trembled. A terrifying sword will soared into the sky, straight into the 9 heavens. The massive sword will immediately condensed and formed a gigantic sword image. Like a gigantic flood dragon, it soared into the sky. At the same time, the 3 lives stone suddenly trembled intensely, it became extremely unstable, as though it was about to crumble. Everyone retreat. Nye Tian sensed that something was amiss. He shouted out, and signaled for everyone to retreat. Everyone felt that the sword will in the surrounding space had suddenly become berserk. Their faces immediately became shocked, and they all retreated. Jean de Bao suddenly froze, sensing that something was amiss, and cried out, "Boss, oh no, this stone doesn't seem to be able to hold on anymore. It's going to explode." Nye Tian similarly sensed it, and it was even more intense. He sensed that the sword will in his body became restless, the blood and qi in his body surging non-stop. It was as if his sword will lost control and was going to tear his body apart. "My sword spirit!" Right at this time, a cry suddenly sounded out, panicking to the extreme. Nye Tian abruptly turned his head back and saw that it was actually Duanmulu. A black enormous sword appeared behind him. It was precisely his sword spirit, 8 extremities Kunwu. Duanmulu currently already had 5th level Heavenly Emperor strength, but he actually could not control his sword spirit all of a sudden. This was too bizarre. But in the next instant, several more people's sword spirits automatically flew out, rushing towards the horizon. "What's going on here?" Everyone cried out in unison, completely unaware of what was happening. "You guys, quickly look at the sky!" Suddenly, someone shouted, full of panic. Nye Tian's brows furrowed, and he raised his head to look at the sky. The scene that entered his eyes made him suck in a breath of cold air, his entire person stunned. High up in the sky, there were actually many sword spirits floating around, suffusing the entire stretch of sky. The entire sky became a world of sword spirit. Amen. Nye Tian immediately reacted to it. It seemed like the sword will inside the 3 lives stone was too massive, arousing the sword will in the swordsman's body to go berserk and go out of control. Hence, the sword spirits all automatically flew out. Although Nye Tian was a swordsman, he was not a sword spirit martial artist. Hence, the effect of the sword will on him was not very great. Is this the Wan Jian bloodline that Sakura talked about? Nye Tian raised his head and looked at the vast sword spirits high up in the sky, his brows knitted tightly. It seemed like he had indeed thought too simply of the Wan Jian bloodline. This was a kind of power that was far stronger than bloodline. When it was awakened, it directly made all the swordsmen's sword spirits lose control. It was really terrifying. At this moment, the sword spirits high up in the sky suddenly began to let out a sword cry, which resounded through the entire sky. In an instant, heaven and earth shook, and the wind and clouds roared. Everyone's expression was extremely shocked, and they looked at everything in front of them in disbelief. Suddenly, Jean de Bao seemed to have sensed something and shouted in panic, "Boss, the red stone can't hold on any longer. It's going to explode." Nye Tian's eyes trembled violently, and he suddenly turned around to look at the 3 lives stone. That stone was actually very violent, and it was shaking violently, as if it was going to explode at any time. Oh no! Seeing this scene, Nye Tian's heart suddenly sank. He also did not know what kind of power was contained in the 3 lives stone. If it exploded here, the consequences would be unimaginable. He was afraid that the entire divine cold city would be razed to the ground, or at least create another demonic devouring abyss. Chapter 1361. What is Nye Tian doing? Everyone was stunned and confused when they saw Nye Tian suddenly release a giant dragon. Nye Tian ignored the others and stepped forward. He formed a seal with his hands and activated the Annihilation Earth Seal. The ground under his feet suddenly shook and was lifted up in the next moment. The 3 lives stone also rushed into the sky. I have to move the 3 lives stone high up in the sky. Nye Tian had an idea. The crimson golden dragon rolled its body and rushed into the sky with the 3 lives stone. Although there was a sword will barrier around the 3 lives stone and Nye Tian couldn't get close, he still had a way to move the 3 lives stone off the ground. Although the 3 lives stone was powerful, it couldn't destroy anything if it exploded in the sky. In the sky, the crimson golden dragon let out a deafening roar and rushed into the sky. In the blink of an eye, it was tens of thousands of meters in the sky. Nye Tian looked down and estimated that it was about time. He flapped his wings and left in a flash. However, he was still worried and wanted to control the crimson golden dragon to move the 3 lives stone higher in the sky. However, at that moment the 3 lives stone suddenly shook. It could no longer withstand the pressure of the huge sword will. With a loud bang, it collapsed. Boom! In the sky, a huge explosion was heard. The 3 lives stone suddenly collapsed, and a terrifying wave of air rushed in all directions. It was huge and rolled like a stormy sea. Amidst the rolling waves, endless sword intent was whistling, cold and murderous. In the next moment, an ear-piercing sound was heard in the air. The sword will bombarded the body of the golden dragon, and the dragon's body was torn apart inch by inch. The horrible sword will rushed into the dragon, which was extremely sharp. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He felt that something was wrong and his heart sank. The crimson golden dragon had absorbed too much sword will and lost control. Boom, boom, boom. Then, the crimson golden dragon could no longer withstand the pressure of the sword will and exploded. Dragon chi filled the air for tens of thousands of meters. Nye Tian's body trembled slightly and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The dragon vein in his body was severely damaged. "What a powerful force!" he murmured. His body moved, and he retreated 10,000 meters away. His current strength was stronger than that of a lower deity. The power of the crimson golden colossal dragon was terrifying, but it couldn't withstand the impact of the 3 lives stone's sword intent. At this moment, the might of the 3 lives stone's explosion was even stronger than when Chi Wuxi Ocean activated the devil-devouring heaven seal. Nye Tian could feel the enormous sword intent rushing towards him. It was boundless, making it impossible for him to dodge, so he could only take it head-on. Fortunately, his martial body was strong enough to withstand the impact of the sword intent. High up in the sky, in addition to the surging sword will, the countless sword spirits below seemed to have sensed something and went berserk, letting out clear sword cries. In an instant, the sword cries shook the heavens and earth, and the sword will filled the endless void. Right at this moment, Nye Tian suddenly felt that the sword intent within his body had actually become berserk as well. His blood and vital energy roiled incessantly as if they were about to charge out of his body. What terrifying power of the sword intent! Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, but the next moment, the corners of his mouth slightly curled up, revealing a smile. He suddenly felt that the sword intent within his body was actually unceasingly strengthening, as if the sword intent that burst forth from the 3 lives stone had a strong impact on his sword intent. Divine sword intent. In the next moment, Nye Tian immediately understood, and his eyes trembled violently. The sword principal inheritance within the 3 lives stone was left behind by an ancient god realm martial artist, and its sword intent contained a terrifying divine sword intent. At this moment, as Nye Tian absorbed the divine sword intent, his sword intent would naturally continue to strengthen. Boom! Just as Nye Tian reacted, a terrifying sword aura rushed out of his body, faintly condensing into a sharp sword that shot into the sky. "I've broken through." Nye Tian instantly reacted, and his sword principal realm broke through again, from the advanced sword ultimacy to the ultimate sword ultimacy. Breaking through in the sword ultimacy realm was originally very difficult, and it required the accumulation of sword intent to become stronger. Nye Tian had just advanced to the advanced sword ultimacy not long ago, and now that he had once again advanced to the ultimate sword ultimacy, it was enough to show how terrifying the divine sword intent was. At the same time, there were actually countless sword auras that shot into the sky from below. Nye Tian frowned, and instantly understood that the other swordsman's sword principal realm had also been stimulated by the divine sword intent, and they had also broken through. Huff! Nye Tian let out a long breath of impure air, and looked into the distance. Even further up in the sky, there were sword auras rising. It turned out that unknowingly, the sword intent that burst forth from the 3 lives stone had actually spread to the entire heaven realm. The heaven realm was extremely vast, with a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles, and the sword intent within the 3 lives stone was truly terrifying. This time, all the swordsmen in the heaven realm benefited from Sher's awakening of the Wan Jian bloodline. At the same time, in a barren mountain in the desolate heaven unaging lands, on top of a towering precipice, a skinny figure stood upright. As if he had sensed something, his eyes revealed a burning light. If Nye Tian was here, he would be able to recognize that this person was none other than Sword Evil Duguanai. After Duguanai witnessed Nye Tian's power previously, he went into hiding and never showed his face again. He had been bitterly cultivating in seclusion, hoping to borrow the power of the Dusk Blade Heart Flame to break through to the deity realm. The 6th demon fire, Dusk Blade Heart Flame, contained sword intent, and it was a divine sword intent. Duguanai had already sensed that after merging with the Dusk Blade Heart Flame, an even more terrifying sword intent was born in his body. He did not know about the existence of divine sword intent, so he did not know what this sword intent was. He wanted to use this sword intent to break through to the deity realm, but he was still a little lacking, and he had never succeeded. Duguanai thought that if he had merged with the complete Dusk Blade Heart Flame back then, he would definitely be able to break through to the deity realm. And just when he was feeling very depressed, he sensed a sword intent of the same attribute appearing in the void. This simply made him wild with joy. This sword intent is very terrifying. It seems to be even more terrifying than the Dusk Blade Heart Flame's sword intent. It can definitely help me advance to the deity realm. Duguanai felt the enormous sword intent in the void. His whole body released a flame-like sword intent, and it began to frantically absorb the surrounding sword intent. As the sword intent in Duguanai's body became more and more intense, he was shocked to discover that a sword intent whirlpool had actually appeared in his body, and it was gradually solidifying. At this moment, Duguanai felt a brand new realm that he had never felt before. This is... Duguanai was not stupid, and he instantly understood something. His heart suddenly trembled, and he exclaimed 2 words, "Godhead!" That's right, Duguanai actually borrowed the 3 life stones' sword intent to condense Godhead. Becoming a deity in the heaven realm's divine realm, Duguanai's talent was indeed heaven-defying. And at another place in the heaven realm's divine realm, in a valley, a figure similarly stood up, his expression shocked and horrified. This person was none other than Sword Slaughterer Ghostly Scar. Similarly, borrowing the 3 life stones' sword intent, he also condensed Godhead, and advanced to the deity realm. Chapter 1362. Heaven Realm Divine Domain. Boom! Boom! 2 soaring sword intents rose at the same time in 2 places that were tens of thousands of miles apart. They soared into the sky and actually created 2 spatial cracks in the void. The same sword intent attribute. Duguanai and Ghost Scar were in 2 different places, but they let out the same exclamation. Both of them were extremely intelligent people and instantly understood that the other party had also advanced to the divine realm. Ghost Scar, since you have advanced to the divine realm, you will definitely go to the domain. We will definitely meet again. I must snatch the other half of the Twilight Blade Heart Flame. Duguanai smiled coldly. The corners of his mouth curled up and his eyes were cold and murderous. Duguanai had already seen how terrifying the Twilight Blade Heart Flame was. Therefore, he must snatch the other half. Only the complete Twilight Blade Heart Flame could fully display the power of the sword intent within. Duguanai, I'll be waiting for you. On the other side, Ghost Scar thought of the same thing. As if he heard Duguanai's words, he muttered. The eyes hidden under the black robe flickered strangely. Now let me try out the Heaven Wasteland Palace. My good teacher and my good senior brother, did you miss me? On top of the cliff, Duguanai's eyes flickered for a moment. A chill surged within him, making him look extremely cold. He actually wanted to make a move against the Heaven Desolate Hall. After speaking, Duguanai's figure moved, turned into a stream of light and charged towards the Heaven Desolate Hall. At the same time, high up in the sky of the divine cold palace, Nia Tian suddenly saw two sword intents soar into the sky. They were obviously more terrifying than the other sword intent. Moreover, they contained an aura that he was extremely familiar with, the Twilight Blade Heart Flame. Looks like Duguanai and Ghost Scar have advanced to the divine realm with the help of the 3 lives stone's sword intent. Nia Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. His heart trembled slightly and his expression was somewhat complicated. Ghost Scar's advancement to the divine realm was a good thing. However, Duguanai was a cruel and bloodthirsty person. His advancement to the divine realm was definitely not a good thing. Nia Tian had never underestimated Duguanai. This person was extremely sinister and cruel. Most importantly, he knew when to advance and retreat. He knew when to be arrogant and when to be low-key. Moreover, Nia Tian felt that the power of Duguanai's 100 Void body had yet to be developed. Once he advanced to the divine realm, the power of the 100 Void Chi would truly be released. Brother Mo and Brother Jiu will also absorb some sword intent, but they haven't fused with a treasure like the Twilight Blade's Heart Flame. It's not very likely for them to advance to the divine realm. Nia Tian couldn't help but sigh. At this moment, even he had not advanced to the God realm. Although he had absorbed some of the God E-sword essence, the God E-force contained in his body was not strong enough. Not only that, out of all the different types of spirit intent force he had, holographic divine imprints, thunderbolt divine imprints, sword imprints, etc., only that trace of sword imprint was the spirit intent sword intent, the rest weren't. Master! Just then, a familiar voice came out. Niechio's figure appeared. Niechio! Seeing that Niechio was fine, Nia Tian relaxed. Niechio! Seeing that Niechio was fine, Nia Tian relaxed. Nia Tian suddenly raised his head and looked at the place where the sword intent was the densest. A beauty stood in the center of the sword intent. It was as though a sword had descended to the world. It was a peerless talent that could shake the world. Cher! Nia Tian looked at the familiar girl in front of him and called out. Cher stood there, her eyes as clear as water. Like a newborn baby, she was as innocent as snow and as pure as ice. Nia Tian thought that everything was over. He took a step forward and wanted to walk over. However, at that moment, the sword intent in the surrounding space began to surge violently, gathering towards Schwer. In a moment, Cher seemed to have become a black hole of sword intent, swallowing all the sword intent. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The sword intent in the surroundings surged into Cher's body frantically, and a terrifying rumbling sound came out from the sky. Seeing this, Nia Tian could not help but frown, and his eyes could not help but flicker. When everyone on the ground saw that, their faces were overwhelmed with shock, and their expressions were completely sluggish. Too many inconceivable things had happened today, and everyone was already numb to it. Nie Tian felt the sword intent surging frantically all around him, his eyes tensed up, his heart in his throat, afraid that something might happen to Cher. In the blink of an eye, all the sword intent was swallowed by Cher. The peerless figure stood in the sky like a sharp sword, spanning across the heaven and earth. Bang! Just as all the sword intent converged, Cher's body trembled strangely. Following that, a burst of sword force was released and soared into the sky. What a terrifying sword force! Seeing that, Nie Tian frowned and couldn't help but exclaim. This sword force was extremely terrifying, far more terrifying than the sword force produced by Dugu and I and Ghost Scar when they became gods, and it soared into the sky. Everyone's heart trembled violently, and their eyes followed the sword force. Kaboom! The sword force condensed into a huge sword shadow, which rushed to the end of the heaven realm and bombarded the void. Suddenly, the heaven and earth shook, and a terrifying space-time crack appeared. As the space-time crack appeared, a space-time storm surged out, and the sword shadow was sucked into the space-time crack, disappearing in an instant. In an instant, everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. The countless sword spirits floating in the air landed on the ground one after another, and were controlled by the swordsmen on the ground. Cher's figure stood high up in the sky, and suddenly she swayed and fainted. Cher! Nie Tian's figure flashed, and he flashed over to hug Cher. He felt the latter's aura, and everything was normal, so he relaxed a lot. However, at the same time, in the upper realms of the heaven realm, the god realm, Red Moon Divine Palace, Stargazing Hall, an old figure stared at the stargazing array above the hall with a dumbfounded expression. The stargazing array corresponded to the hundreds of plane worlds under the god realm. The heaven realm god realm was just one of the hundreds of plane worlds under the god realm. The old man magnified the stargazing array and stared at the heaven realm god realm. His divine sense kept flowing into the array, and gradually, 3 sword forces appeared in the array. Elder Tsang, what happened? At this moment, a vigorous voice sounded, and then a figure appeared. If the Emperor of Dark Hell, Yi Qinghai, was here, he would immediately recognize that the person was none other than his little brother in the Dark Sea Dark Prison, Qi Yefeng. At this moment, Qi Yefeng had another identity, the Palace Master of the Red Moon Divine Palace. Palace Master, come and see. Stargazing Hall Elder Tsang Yu saw Qi Yefeng appear and exclaimed excitedly. Qi Yefeng took a step forward and came directly to the stargazing array. When he saw the 3 sword forces that appeared in the array, he was stunned. After a few seconds, Qi Yefeng finally reacted and said with a face full of shock, "Someone became a god in the plane world." In the plane world, god realm was extremely rare, almost negligible. Since ancient times, those who could become a god in the plane world were all monstrous geniuses. Yes, 3 people became gods at the same time. Tsang Yu calmed down and nodded. 3 people. Qi Yefeng was stunned for a moment, and after a long time, he reacted and asked in surprise, "Elder Tsang, which plane is this?" "The 14th plane under the God realm, the heaven realm God realm," Tsang Yu said with a smile on his face, because the heaven realm God realm was a plane under the control of the Red Moon Divine Palace. Chapter 1363. Shocking God Domain, Red Moon Divine Palace, Stargazing Hall. Qi Yefeng's first reaction when he heard that someone had become a god in the heaven realm's divine realm was to be stunned. It was already very difficult to become a god in a domain, but becoming a god in a plane world was no different from ascending to the heavens. The first person that Qi Yefeng thought of who could achieve such a feat was Nie Tian, because the latter had the fiend god nascent embryo. "Palace Lord, are you all right?" Stargazing Hall Elder Tsang Yu asked in confusion when he saw Qi Yefeng's expression change. The Heaven Realm's divine realm was a plane attached to the Red Moon Divine Palace. It was a good thing that someone had become a god, so why was Qi Yefeng panicking instead? Oh no! Qi Yefeng's face darkened and he cried out in shock. He guessed that Nie Tian must be one of the three who had become a god in the Heaven Realm's divine realm. This was what made him panic the most. Nie Tian becoming a god was definitely a huge blow to the Red Moon Divine Palace, because Qi Yefeng was still counting on Nie Tian to achieve a good result in the grand competition of the 12 shrines. The grand competition of the 12 shrines was a contest between young martial artists. It was divided into two parts, one for Heavenly Emperor Realm martial artists and the other for Lower God Realm martial artists. Qi Yefeng wanted Nie Tian to participate in the competition between Heavenly Emperor Realm martial artists. If Nie Tian became a god, he would lose the qualification and could only participate in the competition between Lower God Realm martial artists. The level of battle between Lower God Realm martial artists was completely different. It was a battle between peak Lower God Realm martial artists. The day of the competition was approaching, and there were only 3 months left. Nie Tian was only an early-stage lower god. How could he fight with a peak Lower God Realm martial artist? Thinking of this, Qi Yefeng's forehead was sweating profusely, and his whole body seemed to be trembling. Song Yu saw Qi Yefeng's reaction and looked at him in confusion, but he did not dare to say anything. After a while, Qi Yefeng finally calmed down. He let out a long sigh and began to carefully observe the 3 sword moves on the stargazing great array. No matter what, it was a good thing that someone became a god in the Heaven Realm. Elder Tsang, this sword momentum is clearly stronger than the other 2 sword momentum. What's going on? At this moment, Qi Yefeng saw that something was wrong and pointed at one of the sword momentum. The strongest sword aura was actually several times stronger than the other 2. They were both early-stage low god realm experts who had just condensed their godheads, but the difference in their aura and aura was so obvious. This was very unusual. Yes, Palace Master is right. It was obvious that Song Yu was an expert in observing the stars. Moreover, the stargazing grand array in front of them was created by him. Thus he could see more clearly than Qi Yefeng. Song Yu nodded with a smile, saying, Lord Palace Lord, judging from these 3 sword forces, these 3 people's godheads are much stronger than the average god realm cultivators who have just condensed their godheads, and the strongest sword force is stronger than the other 2. According to this old man's judgment, although the owner of the strongest sword force is an early-stage low god realm expert who has just condensed his godhead, his battle prowess is definitely comparable to a mid-stage low god realm expert, and he could even fight a late-stage low god realm expert. Qi Yefeng couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air when he heard Song Yu's words. His eyes became slightly sluggish. When a cultivator reached the god realm, the gap between each small realm was like a chasm between heaven and earth. Those who could cross a small realm to fight were already monstrous geniuses. This person had just condensed his godhead, yet he could already cross 2 small realms to fight. How terrifying! Song Yu nodded again. He suddenly let out a strange laugh and said, What's even more strange is that the aura of the other 2 sword forces is somewhat similar to that of the strongest sword force. It seems that the other 2 were able to become gods because they were stimulated by the strongest sword force. Song Yu was indeed worthy of being a stargazing grandmaster. He could see so many things just from the sword forces. He was right. The reason Duguanai and Ghost Scar were able to become gods was all thanks to Shui. Elder Tsang continued to observe. You must inform me as soon as the 3 of them arrive at the domain. Qi Yefeng calmed down and a strange smile hung on the corner of his mouth. If the strongest person was really as Song Yu said, perhaps the day of the Divine Palace Grand Competition would be the day when the Red Moon Divine Palace would make a comeback. Yes. Song Yu nodded solemnly. Godfiend nascent embryo brat, I've kept a shocking secret for you. Don't let me down. Qi Yefeng's eyes flickered as he said in his heart. The reason why he kept the secret of the Godfiend nascent embryo was not only to repay Yi Qinghai's kindness, but also for the future of the Red Moon Divine Palace. One had to know that if the god-fiend nascent embryo was known by those old monsters, the Red Moon Divine Palace would face a disaster of destruction. Although the Heaven World's God Realm was a subsidiary plane of the Red Moon Divine Palace, it didn't mean that the cultivators of this plane had to join the Red Moon Divine Palace. However, the Red Moon Divine Palace had a great advantage because when the cultivators of the Heaven World's God Realm entered the God Realm, the first place they would come to was under the jurisdiction of the Red Moon Divine Palace. At the same time, in the God Realm's cold Divine Palace's stargazing hall, two figures stood in the hall. These two people were the cold Divine Palace's Palace Master Ling Feng and the stargazing hall's Elder Qin Li. The cold Divine Palace was also one of the 12 Divine Palaces of the God Realm. Each of the 12 Divine Palaces had a stargazing formation that constantly monitored everything in the plane world. Elder Qin informed the people of the Cold Wind Hall to enter the land of the Red Moon. "We must find these 3 people," Ling Feng said solemnly. His face was cold and murderous. "If they are willing to join the Cold Divine Palace, that would be the best. If not, just kill them." This. Qin Li was slightly stunned and his face was filled with shock. Of course, he knew that the Cold Wind Hall was the Cold Divine Palace's secret division. They mainly dealt with some difficult problems and sometimes even assassinated people. Palace Master, the Heaven World's God Realm is a subsidiary plane of the Red Moon Divine Palace. "I'm afraid it's inappropriate for us to interfere," Qin Li hesitated and finally said. "There's nothing inappropriate about it." Ling Feng laughed and said, "The Crimson Moon Divine Palace is already a walking corpse and will soon be eliminated by the 12 celestial palaces. It will be completely removed from the shocking god domain. It is such a pity that such a talented martial artist appeared in the heaven domain. Even if we don't take action, the other divine palaces will." Qin Li was stunned and then nodded. "Palace Master is right. This subordinate will go to the Cold Wind Hall right now." Then, Qin Li's figure flashed and he left. Ling Feng looked at the stargazing formation and his eyes flickered. He smiled coldly and said, "Qi Yefeng, it's time for the grudge between us to end. This time's grand competition of the 12 divine palaces will be the death of the Red Moon Divine Palace. And you, Qi Yefeng, will also die in my hands." The God Realm's God Realm. Everyone knew that the Red Moon Divine Palace and the Cold Divine Palace were enemies. Qi Yefeng and Ling Feng were mortal enemies who would not rest until one of them died. Back then, when the 12 divine palaces were fighting, Qi Yefeng's son died in Ling Feng's hands. Ling Feng's sister also died in Qi Yefeng's hands. Now that the Red Moon Divine Palace was weak, Ling Feng naturally wouldn't let go of such a good opportunity. In the grand competition of the 12 divine palaces, he wanted to destroy the Red Moon Divine Palace in one fell swoop. Anyone who wanted to join the Red Moon Divine Palace was an enemy of the Cold Divine Palace. At the same time, the other divine palaces also made their move. Chapter 1364. Of course, Nie Tian knew nothing about what happened in the God domain. After Cher fainted, Nie Tian brought her to the room, and after confirming that she was fine, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. "Everyone can disperse." Nie Tian walked out of the room, and seeing that everyone was waiting outside the room, he smiled faintly and said. Everyone's tensed heart immediately relaxed, and after bidding farewell to Nie Tian, they left. Nie Tian. At this time, a beautiful figure appeared, hurrying to Nie Tian's side. It was Mo Rushi. In the past few months, Mo Rushi had been in closed-door cultivation, and Cher's awakening made her feel something, so she ended her closed-door cultivation early. Rushi. When Nie Tian saw Mo Rushi appear, he smiled faintly and said, "It's nothing, Cher is fine, just temporarily unconscious." Mo Rushi let out a long sigh, and her nervous little face relaxed a lot. "Rushi, you're already at the peak of the Heavenly Emperor realm." Nie Tian's divine sense sensed Mo Rushi's body, and he could not help but laugh. Mo Rushi smiled, her gentle eyes flickered, and then said, I'll go see Cher first. Nye Tian nodded with a smile, and watched Emo Rushi walk into the room. At this time, Nye Tian and Nye Chio were the only two left in the small courtyard. This time, when Cher awakened, the 3 live stone was destroyed, but the result was not bad, and the most important thing was that Cher was fine. Master. Nye Chio looked at Nye Tian, his eyes slightly trembled, and said, "That seal was given to me by the Sword Elder. He told me to inject it into Miss Cher's body when she awakens." Nye Tian nodded slightly. He guessed correctly. The seal was indeed given to Nye Chio by the Sword Elder. When he was in the room just now, Nye Tian had sensed the seal in Cher's body and discovered that the seal was suppressing Cher's strength. Nye Tian was very puzzled. Why would the Sword Elder leave behind a seal to suppress Cher's strength? Nye Tian, you still don't know Cher's true identity, right? Just when Nye Tian was puzzled, Sakura's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. You know her identity? Nye Tian frowned, his face suddenly darkening. Previously, Sakura had disappeared when Shui had awakened her myriad swords bloodline. Now, he had suddenly reappeared. This made Nye Tian very unhappy. Of course I know, it's just that I can't tell you right now. Sakura let out a strange laugh and said, "The seal you are talking about is indeed used to suppress the little girl's strength. But it didn't have the desired effect." What do you mean? Nye Tian frowned and asked in surprise. Sakura let out another strange laugh and said, "I think the person who left behind the seal wanted to suppress the little girl's strength to the Heavenly Emperor realm, but he definitely didn't expect that the 3 life meridians would actually fuse with Wan Jian's inheritance and form Wan Jian's bloodline. So the power of the seal didn't have the desired effect, and the little girl still condensed her divine spark and advanced to the god realm. If it wasn't for the suppression of the seal, I'm afraid the little girl's strength would at least reach the level of a mid-god, high god, or even over-god. But now she only has the strength of an early low god. But this is also not bad, at least ordinary people can't see her true identity, only the supreme experts might be able to sense that something is wrong." Hearing Sakura's words, Nye Tian couldn't help but frown, his face full of doubt. He didn't expect that the seal left behind by the Sword Elder would be so powerful, and the suppression on Cher was too strong. After absorbing Wan Jian's inheritance, Cher originally had the opportunity to directly reach the over-god level, but because of the seal, she became the current early low god. And at this time, Nye Tian was even more curious about Cher's identity. What exactly is her identity that even experts like Sakura and the Sword Elder were so secretive and didn't dare to say it? It seemed that the Sword Elder left that seal to prevent Cher's identity from being exposed. But he didn't expect that Cher would actually awaken Wan Jian's bloodline, so the suppression of the power of the seal wasn't as good as expected. Nye Tian, if you bring the little girl into the domain together, it's best not to let her see those supreme experts. If her identity is exposed, it will bring you a fatal disaster," Sakura said with a frown, and then his figure disappeared again. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed, and he had a surprised look on his face. Sakura always liked to say things halfway, making people scratching their head. "Master, is that seal okay?" Nye Chio knew that Nye Tian was talking with Sakura, and had been observing Nye Tian's expression, and asked with a worried look. "It's fine." Nye Tian smiled faintly. He believed that since the Sword Elder did this, there must be a reason. But he really wanted to know what was Cher's true identity, to be so mysterious. "Master, there is one more thing I need to tell you." Nye Chio suddenly thought of something and said with a frown. "What is it?" Nye Tian was stunned for a moment and asked in surprise. "The Sword Elder also said that after Lady Cher awakens, there is a possibility." Nye Chio's face was a little embarrassed, and just as he was speaking, he was interrupted by a voice. "Nye Tian, Cher is awake." Emo Rushi's voice suddenly sounded, but she was a little flustered. Nye Tian's face changed, and in a flash, he entered the room. Snow had already woken up. She was half sitting on the bed, but her eyes were filled with shock as she looked at her surroundings. Her clear eyes were filled with unconcealable fear, as if she was unfamiliar with everything around her. She was like a newborn baby, afraid of everything, yet eager to know everything. Nia Tian, Cher seems to have changed, she is always in a daze. Emo Rushi's beautiful eyes flickered as she frowned and said, Cher. Nia Tian took a step forward and called out lightly. Who are you? Cher was startled, she looked at the silver-haired young man in front of her, and subconsciously retreated backwards, appearing to be extremely afraid. This. Nia Tian froze on the spot, Cher actually did not recognize him. Cher, do you still remember me? Emo Rushi looked at Cher and asked gently. Cher shook her head, her face filled with doubt, but she was not afraid of Emo Rushi. Her eyes flickered as she looked at Emo Rushi, as though she was seeking protection. Emo Rushi sat down gently and said gently, Don't be afraid, we are all your friends, we will not hurt you. Under Emo Rushi's consolation, Cher calmed down and nodded her head. This. Nia Tian's mouth twitched, he then looked at Niechio and asked, Cher lost her memories? Yes. Niechio nodded his head and said, I was just about to tell you about this. The Sword Elder said that after Lady Cher awakens, she might lose her memories for a short period of time, but after a period of time, her memories will slowly return. After a period of time, yes, how long? Nia Tian was startled, he could not even reply. Niechio shook his head helplessly, expressing that he did not know either. All right. Nia Tian let out a long breath, his face filled with helplessness. Chapter 1365. Cher's amnesia caught Nia Tian unprepared, but fortunately for Cher, she trusted Emo Rushi. If not, Nia Tian would not know what to do. Nia Tian tried to talk to Cher, but the latter was extremely afraid of him, and kept dodging him. Nia Tian had a look of helplessness, and could only say to Emo Rushi, Rushi, Cher's current situation is somewhat troublesome, I will have to trouble you to take care of her. Emo Rushi nodded her head, and consoled Nia Tian. Cher has only temporarily forgotten who you are, she will be fine after a period of time. Nia Tian smiled bitterly. There was nothing he could do right now. He could only wait and see after a while. Big sister, what's your name? At that moment, Cher looked at Emo Rushi and actually took the initiative to speak. She seemed to have a natural trust towards Emo Rushi, to the point of even relying on her. Emo Rushi smiled faintly, and started to slowly talk to Cher, slowly introducing Nia Tian and the rest, and told them about what had happened between them. Hearing Emo Rushi's words, Cher could not help but look at Nia Tian. She still had a look of doubt, as though she did not believe that she had so many stories with the person in front of her. Nia Tian laughed helplessly, and walked out of the room with Niechio. It could only be said that Emo Rushi's looks were too good, even children had a natural trust in her. Nia Tian and Niechio walked out of the courtyard, and prepared to see how the others were doing. Cher's awakening gave many people the opportunity to break through, especially Duanmu Lu and the other sword spirits, who benefited greatly. However, at this moment, a figure appeared in a hurry. Roar! Seeing Nieyuro walking over, Nia Tian was startled, and his face darkened. Did something happen to an I Jianming again? Big brother Nia Tian. Seeing Nia Tian, Nieyuro cried out in shock, and anxiously said, An I Jianming is awake. He says he wants to see you. He's awake? Nia Tian was stunned for a moment, but he immediately reacted and said, Quickly take me to see him. After being unconscious for nearly 4 days, An I Jianming finally woke up. Nia Tian really wanted to know if his memory had been awakened. Not long later, Nia Tian and Niechio arrived at a small courtyard and directly entered An I Jianming's room. At this moment, An I Zichun was also in the room and was talking to An I Jianming. Nia Tian. Seeing Nia Tian walk over, An I Zichun stood up and greeted him. An I Jianming, you're finally awake. Nia Tian nodded and looked at An I Jianming with a smile. If An I Jianming didn't wake up, Nia Tian really didn't know what to do. Yes. Enai Jiaming nodded and smiled, but his smile was a little complicated. He looked at Enai Zichen and the others and said, "Sister, you and can leave first. I have something to say to Mr. Nye." Enai Zichen's beautiful eyes flickered. She hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded and walked out of the room with Nyeyuro. Enai Jiaming watched Enai Zichen and the others leave, then looked at Nye Tian and let out a long sigh. He smiled bitterly and said, "Mr. Nye, I'm awake." "You're awake." Nye Tian looked at Enai Jiaming and frowned. He hesitated and said, "Did you wake up from the coma, or did you wake up from your memory?" Vaguely, Nye Tian guessed that Enai Jiaming was very likely to have awakened the memory of his previous life. Previously, Enai Jiaming had been calling him Brother Nye Tian, but now he suddenly changed to Mr. That was unusual. Both. Enai Jiaming nodded and said, "Thank you so much for not dying under the absolute shadow prohibition. You've really awakened the memory of your previous life?" Nye Tian was stunned and surprised. Cher had lost her memory, but Enai Jiaming's memory had awakened. How interesting! Enai Jiaming had awakened the memory of his previous life. In front of Nye Tian, he was no longer a young man, but an ancient demon saint. Thinking of this, Nye Tian couldn't help but feel nervous. One had to know that Enai Jiaming had the ability to kill him in a second. A part of it has awakened. Enai Jiaming's reaction was very calm, not much different from before. He smiled and said, "I already know who I am, and I remember a lot of things in the past. Just now, my sister told me about you and the Divine Dragon Clan. I know you're looking for the Dragon Spring Vein." "You know where the Dragon Spring Vein is?" Nye Tian's face darkened and he asked nervously. "I don't know." Unexpectedly, Enai Jiaming shook his head and said, "I haven't awakened the part of my memory about the Dragon Spring Vein, but I remember this thing and the Guardian Clan. I think the thing the Guardian Clan is guarding is the Dragon Spring Vein." At this moment, Enai Jiaming hadn't awakened all of his memory, only a part of it. Nye Tian was stunned for a moment, then he frowned and asked, "Do you remember where the Guardian Clan is?" "I don't remember." Enai Jiaming shook his head again and said, "But I think I can find that place." Nye Tian frowned and couldn't help but laugh bitterly. It seemed that things weren't as simple as he thought, so he asked, "Did you ask me to come here because you wanted to say something?" "Yes." Enai Jiaming nodded and his expression became solemn. He said, "I heard from my sister that you want to enter the territory?" "Yes." Nye Tian nodded and asked, "Is there a problem?" Enai Jiaming's expression became a little gloomy. He said, "If you enter the territory, you must be careful of an organization called Jueying Palace." Jueying Palace. Hearing these words, Nye Tian frowned. He wasn't unfamiliar with this name. He had even seen someone from Jueying Palace before, even though it was just a soul avatar. Nye Chio's physical body was formed from that soul avatar. Nye Tian still remembered that the Jueying Palace elder, who had appeared for a short time, was called Ju Qianqiu. Ju Qianqiu's soul avatar had the strength of a 9th-level heavenly emperor. He didn't know how strong his original body was. As far as Nye Tian knew, the true mastermind behind the destruction of the Divine Dragon Clan was Jueying Palace. Jueying Palace was a very powerful organization more than 600,000 years ago. Even now, I still don't know where this organization came from. Enai Jiaming's expression was solemn. If this organization still exists, I don't know how powerful it would be. Alright, I'll be careful. Nye Tian nodded slightly. He knew very well that Enai Jiaming had asked him to pay attention to Jueying Palace, not only as a reminder, but also to help him investigate Jueying Palace. Is there anything else? Nye Tian couldn't help but ask when he saw that Enai Jiaming seemed to want to say something. One more thing. Enai Jiaming suddenly looked up at Nye Tian and said, "I want to see that dragon soul." Dishi. Nye Tian frowned and his expression changed instantly. He hadn't expected that Enai Jiaming would want to see Dishi. Yes. Enai Jiaming nodded heavily, then let out a long sigh. What happened back then? The Dragon Rebel clan let down the Divine Dragon clan. I want to see Lord Dishi. Maybe I can help him recover his physical body. Recover his physical body. Nye Tion's eyes suddenly trembled. He said in shock, "Is that true?" "Of course." And I Jamming laughed and said, "I'm not completely sure, but at least I can help Lord Dishi recover some of his strength. Are you willing to let me see him?" Nye Tion stood where he was, frowning. He was obviously thinking about something. Chapter 1366. In the room, Nye Tion looked at An I Jamming with keen eyes. The reason why he agreed to An I Jamming's request was that An I Jamming could restore Dishi's physical body. However, Nye Tion also had to consider the risk. An I Jamming's strength far exceeded his, and he had already awakened part of his past life's memory. He was no longer a teenager, so his mentality must be more complicated. Most importantly, Nye Tion still had no idea how strong An I Jamming was. "Mr. Nye Tion, don't worry. I am only at the peak of the middle celestial stage, and the vanishing shadow seal in my body has not been completely removed. My real combat power is only at the peak of the lower celestial stage. Moreover, my martial physique is affected by the 1,000 exquisite illusory seal. If I forcefully use my godhead without the support of the illusory seal, it will trigger the power of the extinction shadow restriction." An I Jamming saw through Nye Tion's worries and explained calmly. Nye Tion narrowed his eyes and said, "You need to borrow the power of the 1,000-gem phantom seal to use the godhead, right?" He had guessed that An I Jamming's memory and strength could be preserved because of the 1,000-gem phantom seal. He was right. "Yes." An I Jamming nodded and said with a bitter smile, "Without the 1,000-gem phantom seal, my strength would at most be at the peak of the Heaven Emperor realm." "I see." Nye Tion's eyes flickered. He did not expect the 1,000-gem phantom seal to have such a great effect on An I Jamming. It seemed that he had underestimated the power of the 1,000-gem phantom seal. "An I Jamming, now that you have awakened your memory, I want to confirm something." At this moment, Nye Tion's face suddenly turned serious, and he said in a deep voice, "I want to know your attitude towards Ro." Although Nyeyuro was not Nye Tion's biological sister, he had always treated her as his biological sister, so he did not want her to be hurt. Previously, An I Jamming was just a young man who had his first awakening of love, but now he was an old monster who had lived for more than 600,000 years. His mentality was definitely different. "Nothing has changed." An I Jamming looked at Nye Tion with a firm gaze and answered indifferently. Nye Tion's eyes trembled. He did not expect An I Jamming's answer to be so simple and firm. After thinking for a while, Nye Tion finally said, "An I Jamming, I'm not a person who likes to threaten others. However, Ro is my younger sister, so I have to tell you that if you betray her, I will kill you regardless of whether you are An I Jamming or mysterious dragon demon saint. I mean what I say. I won't let her down." An I Jamming lifted his head to look at Nye Tion. His eyes were extremely clear, without any impurities. He was no different from the youth from before. "That's good." Nye Tion nodded, then smiled faintly and said, "I've been away from the 3,000 small worlds for some time. It's time for me to go back. When do you want to see Emperor Shi?" "The sooner the better." An I Jamming smiled faintly. "Okay, one day later." Nye Tion nodded slightly and walked out of the room without staying any longer. After An I Jamming's memory was awakened, Nye Tion felt an obvious change in him. An I Jamming's style of speaking became much sharper, but his eyes did not change much. He was still as gentle as before. Nye Tion could not understand. An I Jamming's character was completely unlike that mysterious dragon demon saint who had destroyed the dragon tribe and the 12 ancient demon clans. Perhaps An I Jamming was responsible for the survival of the dragon rebel tribe, so he had already seen through everything and was much calmer. Nye Tion walked out of the courtyard and went to check on Duanmulu and the others. He was relieved to make sure they were all fine. Most of the people around Nie Tian were eager to improve their strength. Li Yi and the others took the Tian Yuan elixir and began to cultivate in seclusion. Duanmu Lu and the others also improved a lot. They comprehended sword principle and entered the state of cultivation. There were fewer people around Nie Tian, but he felt a lot more relaxed. These people's strength improved rapidly. In the future, they would have the opportunity to enter the territory. At that time, they would be a very powerful force. Nie Tian returned to his room. He needed to check his strength. Influenced by Cher's awakening, his strength did not improve, but his sword principle strength had reached the ultimate sword profound meaning level. Nie Tian sat cross-legged and looked inside his body. His primordial meridian and primordial spirit were all normal. But when his divine consciousness entered the Star River precinct, he found that the power of the heart of nothingness had become stronger. It seemed that the star power was gradually unable to suppress the heart of nothingness. The starlight in the Star River precinct was dimming, but the black flame of nothingness was becoming more and more violent. During this period of time, the heart of nothingness had been growing stronger, but the star power in Nie Tian's body had not awakened again. Instead, it had been steadily suppressed. Under such circumstances, the heart of nothingness had become extremely violent. I need to enter the territory as soon as possible to find the boundary of the universe. Nie Tian's eyes darkened slightly as he murmured. His divine consciousness came out of the Star River precinct and began to carefully check every meridian in his body. He was now in the stage of breaking through to the godly realm, so he had to be very careful. At this time, Nie Tian suddenly discovered something strange. He found that his blood had turned dark gold. It seemed to flow in his blood vessels, not like blood, but like a golden river. Nie Tian was taken aback and his eyebrows furrowed. Is this the devil god bloodline? Although his god-fiend nascent embryo had not awakened, he could faintly feel that the god-fiend nascent embryo had begun to affect his body. Nie Tian took a deep breath and focused his mind, feeling the blood vessels in his body more carefully. What he found next made him suck in a breath of cold air. He found that as the god-fiend blood surged in his body, the origin energy in his body was undergoing a strange change. It seemed to be transforming into bright spirit power. The god-fiend blood can transform origin energy into bright spirit power. Nie Tian's eyes trembled violently, and his face was aghast. This discovery was too terrifying, and he was stunned on the spot. The god-fiend blood was indeed abnormal. At this rate, even if Nie Tian did not enter the territory, he would still be able to condense Godhead and advance to the godly realm. At this time, Nie Tian's godfiend nascent embryo had not awakened, but he already had such an abnormal ability. If the nascent embryo awakened, who knew what kind of effect it would have on his body? In that case, I will try to condense godfiend blood into Godhead. Nie Tian became cold. He smiled and began to circulate the 9 extremities war god art. The blood vessels in his body also began to circulate slowly. At this time, his body emitted a golden luster, which was incomparably strange. The next day, Nie Tian opened his eyes, which shone with a sharp light. He could clearly feel that the bright spirit power in his body had increased, and the rest of the bright spirit power was also gradually converging into the godfiend blood. His martial body became even more powerful. At this rate, I will definitely advance to the godly realm in a month at most. Nie Tian muttered with a faint smile. At this time, Nie Tian seemed to have sensed something. His eyes narrowed slightly, and a token appeared in his hand. It was flashing non-stop. Chapter 1367. The everlasting ageless token was given to Nie Tian by old man Tian Huang when he was negotiating with him to facilitate communication between them. At this moment, the everlasting ageless token suddenly flashed with a black light. It was obvious that old man Tian Huang wanted to send a message to Nie Tian. Oh no! Nie Tion's face darkened. He suddenly thought of something and spat out a name, Duguanai. When Cher awakened her Wan Jian bloodline yesterday, Nie Tion already knew that Duguanai had used this opportunity to condense his divine spark. However, he didn't think much about it at that time. Now that the everlasting ageless token had reacted, he suddenly realized that Duguanai was going to attack the Heaven Desolate Hall. Although Duguanai was a member of the Heaven Wasteland Palace, he had always gone against the Heaven Wasteland Palace and had even framed them. Now that he had condensed his divine spark and advanced to the divine realm, he would definitely attack the Heaven Desolate Hall. Eyebrows furrowed, Nie Tion exclaimed, "How could I have overlooked that?" Then, he blurred into action and flashed out of the room. "I have to rush to the Heaven Desolate Hall immediately. I hope it's not too late." Nie Tion frowned. A scroll appeared in his hand and he immediately opened it. This was the spacetime scroll he obtained from Zhao Zi's interspatial ring. It was enough to break the spacetime barrier of the Heaven Realm. Now, he wanted to change the spacetime scroll and directly descend into the Heaven Desolate Hall. Nie Tion's body moved. Sword intent was released from his body and poured into the spacetime spiritual array, forcibly changing some of the information in the spiritual array. Nie Tion. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded. It was Emo Rushi and Cher who walked over. Emo Rushi couldn't help but be stunned when she saw Nie Tion's nervous expression. Her little face also became flustered. "Rushi, I have some urgent matters to deal with. I don't have time to explain." Nie Tion glanced at the two girls and then stepped into the spacetime spiritual array. "Nie Tion, where are you going?" Emo Rushi became even more flustered when she saw Nie Tion's reaction. She took a step forward and entered the spacetime spiritual array as well. "I want to go too." Seeing this, Shue let out a cry of surprise and entered the spirit formation as well. Nie Tion was stunned. He didn't want to waste any more time and immediately activated the scroll. In the next moment, a terrifying spacetime power appeared in the spacetime spell formation, forming a spacetime tunnel that pulled the three of them into it. In the next instant, the surroundings of the three of them changed, and they found themselves in a dense forest. Nie Tion's expression flickered as he scanned the surroundings with his soul awareness. This is the Heaven Desolation mountain range. He had forcefully changed the spacetime scroll, so there was a slight error in the landing location. He did not land in the Heaven Desolate Hall, but in the Heaven Desolate mountain range. Fortunately, the Heaven Desolation mountain range was not far from the Heaven Desolation Palace. With Nie Tion's speed, it would only take him a few minutes to reach the palace. "Rushi Cher, let's go." Nie Tion didn't have time to explain anything. The meteor wings appeared on his back and wrapped around him, Emo Rushi and Shue. With a stomp of his feet, he soared into the sky and turned into a streak of black flame as he flew toward the Heaven Desolate Palace. At the same time, a murderous figure stood in the sky above the desolate range. He held a black longsword in his hand and his body emitted a strong battle intent. It was none other than the evil sword Duguanai. From today onwards, the desolate range will no longer exist in the Heaven Realm. The corner of Duguanai's lips curled into a sinister smile. He suddenly slashed out with the illusionary 100 forms and a dazzling sword ray appeared, falling toward the desolate range. Rumble! With a loud bang, the infinite wasteland Great Hall trembled violently and was reduced to ruins. Countless screams were heard. Countless swordsmen of the desolate range died on the spot. In the next moment, countless figures soared into the sky and fled in all directions. Duguanai's eyes turned cold when he saw this scene. He said coldly, "Trying to escape? Do you want to ask the longsword in my hand?" As his cold voice fell, Duguanai stabbed out with his sword. It actually turned into countless strange sword shadows in the air, blotting out the sky and covering the earth, spreading out in all directions. Everywhere the sword shadow passed, miserable cries could be heard. Blood splattered everywhere, and it was an extremely tragic scene. Most of these people were below the heavenly emperor realm. How could they withstand the attack of Duguni's sword intent? Ah! Die, all of you can die. Looking at the bloody scene around him, Duguanai did not have the slightest bit of pity in his eyes. Instead, he became even more berserk, laughing almost maniacally. It was as if the people in front of him were not his companions, but his mortal enemies. Duguanai was also a member of the Desolate Range Hall and had been taught by Old Man Tian Huang. It was hard to imagine that he had such hatred for the Desolate Range Hall. Ren Tian Huang, Song Shanxue, I know you're here. Come out. Duguanai laughed heartily towards the sky. With a low roar, he directly called out Old Man Tian Huang's name. Following which, he struck out with his sword. The enormous sword's shadow descended like a mountain, directly pressing down. Rumble! On the ground, the sound of explosions rose and fell. The desolate range hall was completely reduced to ruins. The ground instantly cracked, and terrifying ravines crisscrossed. Duguanai, you bastard! In the next moment, a furious voice sounded. Then, a figure soared into the sky and turned into a sharp sword shadow, charging towards Duguanai. Ren Tianhuang, you've finally appeared. Duguanai stared at the silhouette as the corner of his lips curled up coldly. Killing intent erupted from his entire body. His silhouette flickered as sword intent radiated from his body, transforming into a gigantic sword silhouette that rushed down. In the void, the two sword shadows were like two primordial beasts that collided at high speed. Boom! In the next instant, the sound of an explosion rang out as the two sword shadows collided with each other. After that, one of the sword shadows directly shattered and a figure was sent flying towards the ground. Although Old Man Tian Huang had the strength of a peak heavenly emperor, he was still too weak compared to Duguanai. He couldn't even withstand a single attack. Teacher! At this moment, a mournful voice sounded. Then, a figure appeared and caught Old Man Tian Huang in midair. My good teacher, good senior brother, you've finally appeared. Duguanai stabilized his figure and stood in midair. He smiled coldly and revealed his killing intent. Teacher! Song Shanxue didn't care about Duguanai. Looking at the dying Old Man Tian Huang in his arms, he howled in agony. Song Shanxue, run! Old Man Tian Huang's breathing was weak. He used all his strength to say one sentence. He wanted Song Shanxue to run. Finishing his last sentence, Elder Tian Huang closed his eyes and the last wisp of vitality disappeared. Teacher! Song Shanxue screamed in pain. Sword intent erupted from his body and exploded in all directions. Old thing, you're finally dead. Duguanai killed his teacher with one strike. There was no regret in his eyes, only endless joy. Duguanai, you bastard, you killed my teacher! Song Shanxue raised his head and roared at Duguanai in the sky. Killing one's father and teacher was a taboo. Song Shanxue didn't think that Duguanai would be this cruel to even kill his teacher. So what if I killed my teacher? Duguanai smiled coldly and said in a deep voice, when Ren Tian Huang passed the position of palace master to you, he should have thought of this moment. The ice-cold voice was actually bold and confident. A mere hall master's position had caused Duguanai to be jealous for so many years. You bastard, I'll clean up the sect on behalf of my teacher today. Song Shanxue was furious. He roared and charged at Duguanai.